Take a breath. Settle in. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench. Let whatever weight the day left on you start to dissolve into the mattress beneath you. Tonight, we are going somewhere very old, somewhere lit by a dying flame, somewhere the answers have been buried so deeply that even the most obsessive scholars in the lore community have spent more than a decade digging and still come up mostly empty-handed. We are going to Lordran, to Drangleic, to Lothric, and we are going to sit with 150 mysteries that still do not have clean answers. Not all of them will keep you awake. In fact, that is the point. These questions are perfect for the edge of sleep, big enough to fill your mind, open-ended enough to pull you gently into dreaming, strange enough to give you somewhere beautiful and dark to wander. So close your eyes. Or don't. Either way, let the story carry you. Part 1. The Age of Ancients. What existed before the flame. Before the first campfire in the undead asylum ever flickered. Before the bells rang, before the curse spread and the hollows wandered, and the serpents began whispering their half-truths into the ears of desperate undead. Before all of that, there was something called the Age of Ancients, and it is one of the most fascinating and poorly understood chapters of the entire Dark Souls universe. The opening cinematic of the very first game gives us just a sliver of it, a gray world, fog and stone and silence, everlasting dragons ruling over all of it, arch trees stretching up into a dim, sourceless sky, nothing being born, nothing dying, a kind of eternal stillness, not violent, not peaceful, just existing. And then, from underneath that gray world, from deep in the earth where the stone was oldest, something ignited, the first flame. Now, here is the first mystery, the one that all the others grow out of like roots from a single seed. Mystery 1. Where did the first flame come from? Nobody in any of the 3 games ever explains where it originated. It simply appears. The narration in Dark Souls treats it like a natural event, like a sunrise or a tectonic shift. It simply happened. But that is not really an answer. Something does not ignite from nothing. There are theories. Some players believe the first flame was a residual force from a prior age, from a universe that existed before the Age of Ancients and collapsed. Some believe the furtive pygmy somehow caused it, either through some ancient sacrifice or through the sheer weight of their collected dark soul, pressing against the fabric of the world until it cracked and lit. Others believe the flame was always there, just waiting, and the Age of Ancients was itself the anomaly, a kind of temporary suspension of something that was always meant to burn. None of these have been confirmed. The flame's origin is, as of the end of Dark Souls 3 and all its DLC, simply a blank space in the story. An unanswered question dressed up as a premise. When the first flame appeared, it brought with it something remarkable: disparity, light and dark, life and death, heat and cold. The absence of all contrast that had characterized the Age of Ancients cracked open, and from those cracks crawled some of the most powerful beings in the franchise's history. Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight, his knights, his daughters, his children, the Witch of Izalith and her daughters, Nito, the first of the dead, wrapped in a shroud of corpses, and, found almost as an afterthought in the narration, almost buried, described as furtive, the pygmy. Mystery 2. Who exactly was the furtive pygmy? We know a few things. We know the pygmy found the dark soul near the first flame. We know the dark soul was split and divided and given to humans, which is why humanity is so closely linked to the power of the dark. We know the pygmy was considered lesser than the other lords, hence the furtive descriptor, small, quiet, hiding, unnoticed. In Dark Souls 3, the Ring City DLC strongly implies that the furtive pygmy is pygmy lords plural, a dynasty of beings descended from or connected to that original figure, all of them crowned, all of them sleeping, sealed in stone at the edge of a city built at the end of the world. But even that raises more questions than it answers. Was the original pygmy a single being, or was the pygmy concept itself multiple beings who together held the dark soul? Did the pygmy know what they were doing when they found that soul? Or were they simply scavenging near the flame like the others, stumbling into something that would reshape the entire history of humanity? And here is the thread that connects so many subsequent mysteries. Was the pygmy secretly the most powerful lord of all? The dark soul was described as the greatest of the souls found near the first flame, greater even than Gwyn's own Lord's soul, but because it was fragmented and distributed among all of humanity, its power was diffuse, spread thin. And Gwyn, who was smart enough to recognize a threat when he saw one, took steps to make sure that dispersed power never coalesced into something that could challenge him. Mystery 3. Did Gwyn deliberately design the undead curse to suppress the power of the dark soul? This is the theory that changes how you see the entire franchise. According to the primordial serpent Darkstalker Kaathi, and yes, we will talk extensively about whether you can trust anything Kaathi says, but set that aside for now, Gwyn created the dark sign specifically to shackle humanity, to burn away the darkness that lives in every human soul before it could grow into something that rivaled the Age of Fire. The dark sign, that ring of dying fire burned into the flesh of every undead, is not just a mark of affliction. According to this reading, it is a leash. It burns away the accumulation of the dark soul whenever it grows too strong. It keeps humans weak, mortal in a different way than before, perpetually dying and reviving in a cycle that was engineered to keep them from ever reaching their full potential. If this is true, then Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight, the figure presented in the first game as something approaching a god king whose sacrifice saved the world, was actually a tyrant engaged in the long-game subjugation of an entire species. The humans who hollow, who lose their minds and wander as empty shells, are not just victims of an impersonal cosmic force. They are victims of something designed by the most powerful being in the age. But here is where it gets complicated. Because we only hear this interpretation from Kaathi, and Kaathi has his own agenda that we will explore in depth later in this script. So, is the story of Gwyn as tyrant the truth? Or is it Kaathi's spin on events, crafted to manipulate the undead into doing what Kaathi wants them to do? The honest answer is, we do not know, and that ambiguity sits at the center of the entire lore, like a stone at the bottom of a very dark lake. Mystery 4. What is humanity actually? The item description for humanity in Dark Souls 1 says this: "This black sprite is called humanity, but little is known about its true nature. If the soul is the source of all life, then what distinguishes the humanity we hold within ourselves?" That is not an item description. That is the game itself shrugging and admitting it does not have an answer for you. We know that humanity is dark. We know it is connected to the dark soul, the one the pygmy found. We know that collecting humanity can reverse hollowing, temporarily. We know that when it goes wild, when it spills out of a person uncontrolled, it can transform them into something catastrophic, the way it transformed Manus. We know that rats drop it, which implies that animals can possess some fragment of this dark essence, that it is not exclusive to humans even though the name suggests otherwise. But its metaphysical nature, what it actually is on the level of the soul and the cosmos, what it feels like from the inside, what separates human darkness from animal darkness. The game draws a circle around the question and labels it mystery. Mystery 5. Were the everlasting dragons truly immortal or just extremely difficult to kill? Before Gwyn's war against them, before Seath's betrayal thinned their ranks, the dragons were described as eternal. Their stone scales made them impervious to conventional harm. They did not age. They did not need to eat or sleep in the way mortals did. The Age of Ancients, where they ruled, had no death, no change, no fire. It was a static world suited to beings that did not change. But then Gwyn used lightning to strip their scales, and they died. Which raises the question, were they ever truly immortal, or were they simply living in conditions that never tested their mortality? A being adapted for a world without fire, placed in a world full of it, is not immortal, it is just untested. And what about the ancient dragons that survived? Kalameet, the Black Dragon in the Oolacile DLC, Sin in Dark Souls 2, Midir in the Ringed City. Ancient dragons that still breathe and bleed, and carry their wings through a world that has changed enormously since their age. How have they survived for so long while the rest of their kind fell? What do they know that we do not? Mystery 6. What was the Age of Ancients actually like to live through? Or rather, was anything living through it? The everlasting dragons are described as eternal, but they are also described as largely motionless, like the arch trees, like the gray fog. Were there creatures in the Age of Ancients aside from dragons, moving through that still world, experiencing something like consciousness? Or was it truly just stone and fog and vast winged silhouettes and an absolute absence of anything we would recognize as life? Some theories point to pre-flame entities that might have existed in the Age of Ancients and persisted beyond it. Certain creatures in the games feel too alien, too old, too strange to be products of any civilization we know about. The basilisks, with their terrible curse-inducing spray and their unsettling hollow eyes. The mushroom people, which no lore really accounts for. The stone knights in the Darkroot Garden, who are not golems so much as something that grew, something that formed organically from ancient stone, as if the earth itself was trying to build a guardian. Were these remnants of something that existed before the flame? Creatures from an age that had its own logic, its own ecosystem, its own strange continuity that the arrival of fire simply disrupted rather than created? Nobody knows. Mystery 7. Why did the first flame produce souls? The logic of souls in Dark Souls is that they come from the flame. When the flame is strong, souls are abundant and powerful. When it fades, they thin out and weaken. The lords found their souls near the flame, close to it, as if they were drawn to the heat and found something waiting for them. But why would fire produce something so fundamental to consciousness and identity? Why would heat and light and the energy of combustion create the capacity for thought, emotion, and individual identity? This is the question that has no satisfying answer within the game's own logic. It is treated as a given, as a metaphysical law. Fire equals souls, darkness equals humanity, light and dark in opposition equals everything else. But the why underneath it is never illuminated. It simply is. Perhaps that is intentional. Perhaps the mystery of why the flame makes souls is the same mystery as asking why there is something rather than nothing, an unanswerable foundation on which everything else is built. Mystery 8. What happened in the Age of Ancients to create the kiln at its heart? The kiln of the first flame is where Gwyn went when he could not sustain the fire through sheer force of godly will anymore. He walked into it and burned, linking himself to the flame and keeping the Age of Fire going at the cost of his own coherent existence. When you finally reach him in the game, he is hollow, the last vestiges of his mind consumed by millennia of burning. But the kiln exists in a very specific place, deep beneath Lordran, surrounded by the ash of Gwyn's Black Knights, who were burned away with him. It feels ancient even by the standards of the game's ancient things. Too old for Gwyn to have built it. Old enough that it might predate the Age of Fire itself. Did the kiln exist before Gwyn? Was it a structure from the Age of Ancients, something the dragons built, or something that formed around the first flame as a natural consequence of its existence? Was Gwyn linking himself to the flame the first time that it ever happened? Or were there others before him, sacrificed into the kiln in ages so old that even the game's memory cannot reach them? The kiln holds its secrets in the ash. If you are still with me, take a slow breath. These mysteries do not need to be solved tonight. They can rest in your mind like seeds. Let them sit. Let the darkness fill in around them. We have so much further to go. If you are finding this journey worthwhile, consider leaving a comment below. What is your favorite unsolved Dark Souls mystery? And if you want more nights like this one, a subscription goes a long way toward making sure we can keep doing this together. Now, let us go deeper. Part 2. The Undead Curse, a weapon disguised as a plague. Here is the thing about the Undead Curse that the game never quite states directly. It is not natural. The way it spreads, the way it works, the specific and almost mechanically precise way it degrades human consciousness while preserving enough of the physical body to keep functioning. That is not what a natural disease looks like. Natural diseases are sloppy, they overshoot, they damage things at random. The curse is surgical. Mystery 9. Why do only some humans get the dark sign? This is never explained. In a world where the curse is supposedly tied to the fading of the first flame, you would expect it to spread evenly across all of humanity as the flame weakens. But it does not. Some people in Lordran are fully alive and unaffected, while others bear the mark. Soldiers in Anor Londo, innkeepers in the Undead Burg, merchants who have set up shop in the most cursed locations in the world, they are alive, pink-cheeked, fully mortal, completely untouched by the affliction that has transformed their neighbors. Why? What distinguishes a person who gets the mark from one who does not? Some players theorize it is connected to the size of one's humanity. Those with more of the dark soul within them are more susceptible to the curse because the dark sign is specifically targeting that dark essence. Others theorize it is hereditary, passed down through lineages descended more directly from the furtive pygmy. Others simply believe it is arbitrary, a function of proximity to the fading flame that has no deeper logic. But if Gwyn designed it, which the Kothi reading suggests, then the arbitrariness might itself be intentional. A curse that only targets some people creates division. It sets the marked against the unmarked. It creates institutions, like the Way of White and their undead asylum, dedicated to removing the marked from society rather than studying the cause. The curse in this reading is not just a suppression tool, it is a social weapon. Mystery 10. Is hollowing truly a loss of self or a transformation into something else? The standard reading of hollowing is tragedy. A person loses their memories, their identity, their connection to other people and purposes, and becomes a shambling, violent husk, wandering the last corridors their mind could hold on to before it emptied. But there is a strand of the lore, particularly in Dark Souls 2, that complicates this. Aldea, scholar of the First Sin, is one of the most intellectually interesting characters in the entire franchise, and he suggests that the hollowing process might not be a loss so much as a return. A shedding of the constructed self, the persona built up by social roles and expectations, and the pressure to maintain an identity in a world that demands consistency, and a descent back into something more primal, more essentially human. If the human soul is fundamentally composed of the dark soul, the fragment given to humanity by the pygmy, then hollowing might be the process by which that construct self dissolves and the raw, dark essence underneath is exposed. Not a death, a kind of terrible honesty. This does not make it any less horrifying to watch, but it changes the moral calculus slightly. If hollow individuals are not dying but transforming, if there is still something experiencing that state even if it cannot communicate coherently anymore, then the practice of killing hollows, which every hunter and knight in these games does without a second thought, takes on a different texture. Mystery 11. Can hollowing be reversed permanently? In Dark Souls 1, the dark sign can be temporarily suppressed with humanity. Firekeepers can restore your human form. But every bonfire is just a reset, and the accumulation of deaths gradually tips you back toward the hollow state. The game implies strongly that there is no permanent cure, that the curse will always win, eventually. Dark Souls 2 introduced human effigies as a different mechanism for the same suppression, and it also added the 4 crowns of its DLC, each of which grants permanent resistance to hollowing when worn by the bearer. King Vendrick's dialogue suggests that finding all 4 crowns and wearing them together represents the closest thing to a genuine cure that any civilization has discovered. But it is still just resistance, not reversal, and it requires collecting relics from kingdoms that destroyed themselves, pursuing the same fire versus dark conflict that caused the curse in the first place. Dark Souls 3 complicated things further with the concept of the unkindled. Undead who tried to link the flame previously and failed, burning away to ash, and being resurrected once more when the next cycle calls for sacrifice. These beings are so deeply embedded in the curse that they cannot hollow in the normal sense. They are already beyond that threshold, which raises the question, is there a state beyond hollowing? And if so, what is it? Mystery 12. What happens to a hollow after the world ends? The third game's events take place at the very end of the cycle. The flame is dying in a more final way than it ever has before. The Lords of Cinder refuse to return to their thrones. The world is fragmenting and collapsing inward, and scattered across every location are hollows. Not just the violent, shambling kind, but some who seem strangely lucid, strangely aware, kneeling or wandering in ways that suggest some residual intention. If the flame goes out entirely and the Age of Dark begins, what becomes of them? Do they continue to wander? Do they finally die? Or does the removal of the dark sign's pressure, because the flame that powers it is gone, somehow release them from the state entirely? The game's endings do not tell us. The Age of Dark, if it comes off screen, after the credits roll. Mystery 13. Why does the dark sign prevent true death? This is one of the most philosophically rich questions in the whole lore. The dark sign keeps an undead from dying permanently. It brings them back at the nearest bonfire, restores their physical form, and lets them try again. This is framed as a curse, but from a strategic standpoint, it is an extraordinary gift. An immortal soldier who can fight endlessly, who cannot be permanently stopped, who can throw themselves into impossible situations over and over without permanent consequence. Gwyn built the undead into a mechanism for sustaining the Age of Fire. The undead are drawn to the flame, compelled to link it, to sacrifice themselves to keep it burning. If they could die permanently, that plan would be less reliable. So, did Gwyn make them immortal as part of the same design that cursed them? Was the resistance to death a feature, not a flaw? And if so, why does hollowing still happen? If the curse is designed to create useful servants of the flame, why does it also erode them until they become useless husks? Was that a miscalculation? Or was the hollowing of most undead intended, leaving only the rare few strong enough to survive the erosion as the ones who actually reach the flame? The architecture of the curse suggests a designer with a specific goal, but the results of that curse are too messy, too varied, too painful to look like a clean design. Something in between intention and accident happened here. We just do not know what. Mystery 14. What is a bonfire, actually? Bonfires are the save points of the game, mechanically, but lore-wise, they are something much stranger. They are remnants of the first flame, fragments of its power scattered across the world. When an undead rests at one, it becomes their anchor, the place their soul returns to when the body is destroyed. They are simultaneously funeral pyres, built from the bones of undead who came before, and the mechanism for resurrection. But who built the first bonfire? Who discovered that you could rest at one and be restored? Was this knowledge that spread naturally once the undead curse began? Or was it something that the healing churches or the scholars of early civilizations discovered and then disseminated? And why do bonfires respond to the undead specifically? A living person can light one, sit beside it, warm themselves. But the specific magic of resurrection, the return after death, the restoration of Estus, that only works for the marked. The dark sign and the bonfire are in dialogue with each other in a way that suggests they were designed together, which loops back to the question of who or what designed either of them. Mystery 15. What is the relationship between Estus and the flame? Estus flasks fill up with a glowing amber liquid when you rest at a bonfire. That liquid heals the undead. It is, by all available evidence, a distillate of the first flame itself. Warmth and energy drawn out of the burning soul fire of the world and compressed into something that can be carried and consumed. But why does it only heal the undead? Why does drinking liquid fire repair wounds? What is the mechanism by which warmth restores flesh and bone and the internal coherence of the soul? The game treats Estus as a given, as obvious as food or medicine, but its nature is as opaque as everything else in Lordran, and the questions it raises about the relationship between fire and life, about whether the undead are technically living in a way that requires the specific fuel of the first flame to sustain, thread through the entire metaphysical structure of the world. Part 3. Gwyn's family, the children who were erased, and the lies that filled the space. There is a room in Anor Londo where you can find 2 large alcoves in the back wall, each holding a statue. Between them is a third alcove, empty. The space where a third statue once stood, and was removed. That empty alcove is one of the most eloquent storytelling decisions in the franchise's history. It is the story of erasure, of someone so thoroughly excised from the official record that only the absence remains. Mystery 16. What exactly did Gwyn's firstborn do that was so unforgivable? We know the broad strokes. The firstborn, the god of war, betrayed his father by siding with the everlasting dragons during or after the war. He was punished by having his name stripped from history and his divinity revoked. We know from Dark Souls 3 that this figure is almost certainly the Nameless King, the secret boss of the Archdragon Peak, who lives in the clouds with dragons and whose armor bears a resemblance to Gwyn's own crown. But the specifics of what he did, or more importantly why, are never clarified. Did he side with the dragons because he genuinely believed they were right? That the Age of Fire was a violent usurpation of a world that had existed in peace? Did he do it out of love for a specific dragon, the way the Nameless King is accompanied by his dragon companion, the King of the Storm? Was it ideological, personal, a grudge against his father's methods? The item for the Ring of the Sun's Firstborn says his foolishness led to a loss of the annals and rescinding of his status. The word foolishness is interesting. It does not say treachery or malice. Foolishness implies a well-intentioned error, a misjudgment with catastrophic consequences rather than a deliberate betrayal. Did the firstborn believe he was doing something right, perhaps even noble, and was simply wrong in a way that his father could not forgive? Mystery 17. Where did the nameless king go after his exile? After being stripped of his name and divinity, the firstborn disappeared from the annals. He reappears, presumably, in the Archdragon Peak of Dark Souls 3, living among the last true dragons. But what happened in the enormously long gap between those two events? He was exiled before Gwyn linked the flame. He appears in Dark Souls 3 at what is essentially the end of the world. That is an almost incomprehensible span of time. What did he do with all of it? Did he wander? Did he build something? Did he grieve? Did he watch the civilizations rise and fall below him from his mountain in the clouds and feel any of the things that a person feels when they watch the world their family built destroy itself? The Nameless King is one of the hardest bosses in the series, but he is not a villain. His fight is not accompanied by any sense of malice. He is guarding something. He is protecting the last of his companions. He is a man who made a choice so long ago that the choice itself has been forgotten, and he is still living inside the consequences of it. Mystery 18. Does the Nameless King remember who he was? His name was stripped, not just from the records, but apparently from general knowledge. Even Solaire, who followed the covenant of the firstborn symbol, did not seem to know the true identity of the god he worshipped. If a god's name can be erased from history, can it be erased from the god himself? There is a heartbreaking reading of the Nameless King in which he does remember, in which every day in those clouds is lived with full awareness of who he was, who his father was, what he chose, and why, in which the loneliness of the Archdragon Peak is a chosen exile rather than an imposed one, a space he carved out not because he was rejected, but because he found somewhere that felt like truth. There is an equally heartbreaking reading in which he does not, in which the process of divine erasure was thorough enough that he genuinely cannot remember his own name, his own family, his own prior life, in which he is a creature defined entirely by his present, the dragons, the mountain, the wind, because the past was taken from him. Mystery 19. Who are the sunlight altars praying to? Throughout the Dark Souls games, there are altars to the god of war, the firstborn. They feature a statue of a young man holding a spear, posed like a warrior. Players can join the Warriors of Sunlight Covenant at one of them in the first game. Solaire himself is associated with this covenant. But if the firstborn's name was erased from history, who do his worshippers think they are praying to? Do they know it is the exiled son of Gwyn? Or has the erasure been so complete that his followers worship the power of sunlight and lightning without understanding where that power originates? Is the Covenant's connection to the firstborn a genuine spiritual bond, or an accident of tradition, a ritual that outlasted its original context and now runs on momentum alone? Mystery 20. What did Gwyndolin actually want? Gwyndolin, the youngest child of Gwyn, raised as a daughter because of his deep connection to moon magic, is perhaps the most tragic figure in Anor Londo. He maintains a city that has been abandoned by all the gods. He keeps an illusion of his sister alive to deceive the undead into following the prophecy. He guards his father's tomb with the Dark Moon Blade's covenant. But what does he want for himself? Not for his father's legacy, not for the continuation of the Age of Fire, but for Gwyndolin, the individual? Every choice he makes in the game is in service of something external. He serves Gwyn's memory. He serves the need for a city to have a presence. He serves the illusion. When you finally fight him in his hallway, the infinitely receding corridor that mirrors his illusory nature, he runs from you, not from cowardice. The fight is actually quite difficult, but because the architecture of his existence is about distance and indirection and a deep, terrible unwillingness to be seen. In Dark Souls 3, Aldrich consumes him. The Devourer of Gods eats Gwyndolin and uses his power to access the font of Anor Londo's divine lineage. Gwyndolin at this point is barely alive, maintained in some kind of agonized half-existence inside Aldrich's body, still experiencing something even as his selfhood dissolves. What does he think in those last moments? Does he understand what happened to the world his father built? Does he feel he failed? Or does he feel, in some strange way, that in being consumed by something that desired power so completely, he was finally seen? Mystery 21. Where is the real Guinevere? The Guinevere you meet in Anor Londo is Gwendolyn's illusion, but the real Guinevere existed once, the actual daughter of Gwyn, the Princess of Sunlight. Item descriptions tell us she left Anor Londo and married the flame god Flan and bore him children. But where is she? Where did she go? In a world where the gods have largely abandoned Lordran, where they retreated from their city and left Gwendolyn to manage the ruins of their authority, Guinevere simply moved on. She found someone to love. She built a family. That sounds almost like a good ending for at least one member of this extremely cursed divine family. But we know nothing about what happened to her after. Did she age? If she is part of a divine lineage, does she even age? Did her children inherit her sunlight connection? Is there a line of demigod-adjacent beings somewhere in the world who can trace their ancestry back to Gwyn himself? The game never says. Mystery 22. What is Filianor actually doing? Filianor, the youngest daughter of Gwyn, does not appear in the first 3 games. She is mentioned in item descriptions, referred to as a beloved child of Gwyn who was sent to the Ringed City to soothe the people there. In the Ringed City DLC of Dark Souls 3, you finally reach her. She is sleeping, curled like an infant around a petrified egg. If you wake her, if you take the egg, the world literally breaks. You are flung from the end of the Ringed City into a post-apocalyptic desert, a landscape that exists beyond the collapse of all things. Her purpose was not to rule, or to fight, or even to live in any active sense. Her purpose was to sleep, and to be a promise. The egg she holds is described as a divine child, or a kind of cosmic covenant. Her father sent her here to hold this thing, to be a monument to a promise, to soothe the people of the Ringed City through her presence. And she has been doing that, asleep for longer than any civilization we know of has been alive. What does Filianor dream of? What is the egg, really? What promise was Gwyn making when he sent his youngest child to be an eternal sleeping monument at the edge of the world? The DLC does not answer these questions. It just shows you the sleeping girl and the egg and the world that breaks when you disturb them. Part 4. The Serpents. Trust and manipulation at the heart of the prophecy. 2 serpents. 2 agendas. 1 player character who has to decide which one is lying and which is also lying. Kingseeker Frampt and Darkstalker Kathi are the 2 primordial serpents in Dark Souls 1, and they represent one of the game's most sophisticated pieces of lore design. They appear to be offering opposing paths, but the more you examine both of them, the more you begin to suspect that the opposition might be constructed. Mystery 23. What are Frampt and Kathi actually? They are described as primordial serpents. They are enormous, with scaly bodies that stretch into the dark pools they emerge from, with long fanged jaws and an oily, ancient quality to their voices. They predate the Age of Fire. They were present in some form during the Age of Ancients. But what were they then? Were they advisors to the dragons? Were they some kind of elemental entity that emerged from the same deep darkness that produced the Dark Soul? Were they, as some theories suggest, corrupted versions of the everlasting dragons themselves? Something that happened to the scaled beings when the Age of Ancients ended and the New World's forces began to act on creatures that were not designed for it? The absence of any explanation for their origin is conspicuous. Everything else in the Dark Souls universe has at least a vague backstory. The serpents have nothing, they simply are, speaking with confidence about the nature of the world, and we are left to wonder where they came from and what they were before we found them. Mystery 24. Does Frampt actually believe in the Age of Fire? Frampt presents himself as a loyal servant of Gwyn. He guided the undead toward the prophecy of the Chosen One. He urged the linking of the flame. He seemed to genuinely mourn the diminishment of the gods. But there is a detail that unsettles this picture. If you choose Kathi's path in Dark Souls 1, if you become the Dark Lord and let the Age of Fire end, Frampt simply goes away. He sinks back into his pit and is not seen again. He does not fight you. He does not reveal a hidden depth of commitment to the cause he claimed to champion. He just leaves, which suggests that Frampt's investment in the outcome was thinner than his rhetoric implied, that he was playing a role rather than advocating a belief. And if his advocacy for the Age of Fire was performance, what is underneath the performance? What does Frampt want in a world without his stated purpose? Mystery 25. Is Kothi actually trying to help humanity, or just using humanity as a tool? Kothi tells the undead that they are the rightful heirs to the Age of Dark, that the Dark Soul is the greatest of the four, that the Age of Fire was an interruption of humanity's natural inheritance, not its fulfillment. He offers a vision of human potential and dignity that is enormously appealing, especially in contrast to the grinding servitude that Frampt's path implies. But in Dark Souls 3, we learn that Kothi is still operating. The Sable Church of Londor, the organization devoted to creating a Lord of Hollows who will usurp the flame, was founded in his service. His agent Uria is still pursuing his ancient plan. And what is that plan? To have an undead absorb the flame rather than link it, becoming a Lord of Hollows, a new kind of ruler who embodies both fire and dark. But what does Kothi get from this? If humanity flourishes in an age of dark, what role does Kothi play in that age? Does he become their new Gwyn, the power behind their power? Was his rhetoric about human potential always just a better sales pitch for the same fundamental arrangement, a powerful being using humans as instruments? The question of whether Kothi is a liberator or a more sophisticated tyrant is genuinely unresolved. The game gives you enough evidence for both readings and then steps back and lets you live with the uncertainty. Mystery 26. Are Frampt and Kothi working together? This is the theory that keeps the lore community awake at night. The idea that the two apparently opposing serpents are actually partners, running a long con on every undead who has ever arrived in Lordran. Think about the structure of it. Frampt offers one path, Kothi offers another. One path links the flame and perpetuates the cycle. The other supposedly ends the cycle and begins the Age of Dark. But Kothi's path in Dark Souls 3, the usurpation of fire, is not ending the cycle. It is modifying it, still using the flame, still requiring a sacrifice, just under new management. If the two serpents are in dialogue with each other, if they have been routing different undead into different outcomes for thousands of years, what is the purpose of all that routing? What outcome have they been steering toward? What do they want the world to look like when the cycle finally reaches its conclusion? The alternative, that they are genuine enemies, that their opposition is real, and their war over the direction of the world is sincere, seems almost too simple for a game this invested in subverting its apparent moral frameworks. Mystery 27. Who were the serpents advising before the undead came along? If they are as old as they appear, if they predate the Age of Fire and have been present through the entire history of Lordran, then the undead are not their first clients. Who came before? Who did Kothi counsel in the ancient days? Who did Frampt guide toward the flame before the prophecy of the chosen undead was developed? Were there chosen undead before the game's chosen undead? Were there prior cycles, prior heroes, prior sacrifices that linked prior flames in prior ages? If the cycle has been turning long enough for the floor of Firelink Shrine to be built on layers of prior Firelinks, then the serpents have been playing the same game over and over, and the two figures whispering conflicting advice into the ear of your specific character are just the latest performance of a play that has run for millennia. Part 5. Artorias and the Abyss. The Knight Who Fell, and the question of who was watching. The legend of Artorias, the Abyss Walker, is one of the most beloved pieces of Dark Souls mythology. The great knight who descended into the abyss to stop Manus, who sacrificed his shield arm to save his wolf companion Sif, who fought on when he was already corrupted and falling apart, and died with his weapon arm still raised. Except that is not exactly what happened. Mystery 28. What actually happened to Artorias in the Abyss? When you meet Artorias in the Artorias of the Abyss DLC, he is already corrupted, already hollow in a spiritual sense, though not the standard undead hollowing. He is consumed by the Abyss, his body wrapped in dark tendrils, his mind shattered. He has already lost. What he did, sacrificing his shield arm, creating a barrier around Sif, he did before the corruption fully took hold. He descended into Oolacile, encountered Manus, and was defeated. The corruption entered him and spread. And then he wandered the abyss, still fighting, still dangerous, but no longer himself. The legend that survived into the main game's present paints him as a hero who defeated the abyss. But that is not true. He lost. he was corrupted. The chosen undead who travels back in time takes his place, fights Manus, and becomes the anonymous hero that Dusk mistakes for Artorias when she tells the story. So, the legend of Artorias is built on a lie, or rather, on an error. Dusk genuinely believed she was saved by Artorias, and the story spread from there, and Artorias died as a warrior of legendary status for a victory that was not actually his. Does Artorias know this, in his corrupted state? Is any part of the legend, the idea of what he could have been, available to him as he rages and fights and eventually falls to the chosen undead's blade? Mystery 29. Who was the primordial serpent that guided Oolacile to its doom? Marvelous Chester, a character who appears to have been pulled into the same time travel event as the player character, says plainly that Oolacile was fooled by that toothy serpent into digging up Manus's grave. We know the serpent was primordial. We know it was not named in this statement, which is conspicuous. Was it Ka'athi? The destruction of Oolacile served Ka'athi's general project of spreading the abyss and weakening the Age of Fire. It would fit his pattern, but there is no explicit confirmation. Was it Frampt? Frampt has his own complicated relationship with the gods, and Oolacile's dark sorceries were a potential challenge to the established magical traditions of Gwyn's world. Destroying Oolacile could have served Frampt's interest in protecting the established order. Was it a third serpent? Are there more than two? The game shows us Frampt and Ka'athi as the two sides of the coin, but nothing prevents the existence of additional serpents who operate outside that binary. The identity of the Oolacile serpent is one of the oldest unsolved questions in the lore. Mystery 30. What is Manus actually the father of? Manus is called the father of the abyss, but the abyss is not a creature. It is a state, a force, a metaphysical condition. You cannot be the biological father of a force. So, what does that title mean? One reading is that Manus created the abyss, that before he went mad, before his humanity went wild, there was no abyss. Or at least no abyss of that magnitude. His transformation into a dark god of sorts was the generative event. Another reading is that Manus is the father in the sense of originator or embodiment, that he represents the principle of the abyss the way a saint represents a virtue. He did not create the dark, he became its purest expression, the first to fully become what the dark can make of a human. And then there is the interpretation that the abyss, as presented in the DLC, is not just a force, but almost a living thing, and that Manus is its progenitor in a more direct sense. That the fragments of Manus's shattered soul that appear in Dark Souls 2 as Nashandra, Alsana, Nadalia, and Alana are literally his children, pieces of his fractured consciousness that developed individual personalities and desires over the centuries. If that last reading is correct, then the Abyss does have children, and they walked through the history of Drangleic wearing human faces and queen's crowns. Mystery 31. Why was Manus's pendant so important to him? When the Serpent of Oolacile guided the sorcerers to dig up Manus's grave, they awoke him. His humanity went wild, but even in that state, even as the abyss consumed everything around him, he reached through time searching for something specific, his pendant. The pendant the player can carry is described as a simple trinket, small, personal, something a person carries because it matters to them rather than because it is powerful. Manus was the oldest human. He may have been the first human, or something close to it. He had been buried for an incalculable length of time, and when he was woken into madness, the one thing his shattered mind could still reach for was this small personal object. What was the pendant? Who gave it to him? What connection does it represent that survived everything? The burial, the passage of ages, the expansion of the abyss, the complete dissolution of his identity, and still called to him? The game gives you the pendant as a starting gift, and it does nothing. You can carry it through the entire game, and it has no mechanical purpose, but narratively, it is loaded with weight. It is the thing that matters most to the oldest human in the world, and we never find out what it means. Mystery 32. Does Sif know that Artorias lost? Sif, the great gray wolf, guards Artorias' grave in the Darkroot Garden. Artorias placed his shield and its magic around Sif before the corruption fully took him, protecting the wolf at the cost of his own ability to defend himself. Sif has been here ever since, keeping the grave, keeping people away from whatever is buried there. If you have completed the DLC before reaching Seath's boss fight in the main game, Seath recognizes you. The fight changes. Seath hesitates, limps, seems reluctant to fight someone the wolf recognizes as the true hero of Oolacile, the one who actually finished what Artorias could not. But does the wolf know the truth of what happened? Does Seath know that Artorias fell to Manus? That the legend was wrong? That the victory belonged to someone else? Or does Seath's grief and protectiveness carry a layer of misinformation along with it, honoring a champion for a triumph that was not really his? Part 6. Seath the Scaleless, Madness, Immortality, and the Dragon Who Betrayed His Own Kind. Of all the figures in Dark Souls, Seath the Scaleless might be the one who best illuminates the game's central preoccupation with the costs of pursuing transcendence. He wanted what he could not have by nature, and the pursuit of it destroyed everything that was worth having. Mystery 33. Did Seath actually want to be a dragon? Here is the fundamental pathos of Seath. He was born without scales, which meant he was born without the natural immortality that defined his species. Among the everlasting dragons, who were defined by their eternal endurance, Seath was the failure, the aberration. He could not die from old age, but he could be killed. He was uniquely vulnerable in a world of invulnerable peers. His betrayal of his own kind was not ideological. He did not look at the age of ancients and decide it was wrong. He looked at his own body and decided it was unfair. He made a deal with Gwyn not because he believed in sunlight or fire or the fall of dragonkind, but because Gwyn had a primordial crystal, a source of immortality that could give him what he lacked. The question is whether Seath ever felt anything about that betrayal afterward. The dragons died because of him. The species that defined the world's previous age was largely destroyed because one member of it was jealous of what the others had. Did the weight of that land on him in his long, immortal years in the archives? Did any part of him grieve what he caused? All evidence from the game suggests not. Seath's madness consumed him. He became obsessed with his research, with experiments, with replicating through study and magic the physical permanence that his birth denied him. The moral dimension of his choices seems to have been one of the first things to dissolve as the obsession grew. Mystery 34. What was Seath actually trying to create? The experiments in the Duke's archives are deeply disturbing. The Pisakas, pale, tentacled creatures with human faces, are described in the game's lore as failed experiments, and they drop items connected to Guinevere's maidens, suggesting that at least some of his subjects were members of the royal household of Anor Londo. His channelers move through the world collecting human specimens for further research. The basement of the archive tower contains what the key description calls the writhing mistakes of the terrifying experiments which were conducted there. What was the end goal? Was he trying to create a new kind of being that combined dragon-scale permanence with human adaptability? Was he trying to extract the essence of the immortality he gained from the primordial crystal and embed it into living flesh? Was he, at his deepest level, trying to undo his own nature by creating something that was innately immortal rather than artificially so? The game gives us the products of the experiments, the Pisakas, the crystal golems, the moonlight butterfly, but not the blueprint, not the design document of what Seath was working toward when he was still sane enough to have goals. Mystery 35. What happened to Big Hat Logan's mind? Big Hat Logan, the legendary sorcerer who appears in multiple locations across Lordran on a journey toward greater magical knowledge, ends his arc in the Duke's archives as a hollowed, naked, hostile figure, fighting in the room where Seath was first fought. He went mad. That much is clear. The item descriptions of his final crystal sorceries indicate that the magic he learned by studying in Seath's archives was now in tatters, implying that the process of learning certain kinds of magic can fracture the mind the way accessing the cosmic truths of the Great Ones fractures minds in Bloodborne. But the specific nature of his madness is curious. He is naked. He dropped his robes somewhere, or removed them deliberately. That detail is pointed. It echoes Seath's own scalelessness, his lack of the natural armor that defined his species. Logan, apparently, in his final moments of coherence, stripped himself down to match the being he was studying. An homage? An identification? A loss of the concept of self that left him without the categories of things that should be covered? Was it Seath's specific research that destroyed Logan? Or was it the attempt to understand a being whose fundamental experience of existence, immortal, scaleless, isolated by its own obsession, was simply incompatible with a human mind? Mystery 36. Who guards Seath's legacy in later ages? In Dark Souls 3, the Crystal Sages appear, twin scholars who consider themselves the spiritual successors to the legendary sage Logan and carry on crystal sorceries that trace back to Seath's research. They guard the road to the Cathedral of the Deep, and they possess a scroll, the Crystal Scroll, containing the research of both Seath and Logan. These are beings shaped by a legacy of madness. The knowledge they carry caused two of the greatest minds in the game's history to lose themselves entirely. They teach from a tradition of catastrophic obsession, and yet the Crystal Sages are presented as guardians, as keepers of knowledge, as educators who have carried something valuable forward through the ages. They are enemies in the game, but they are not straightforwardly villains. They are stewards of a deeply ambivalent legacy. What do they believe? Do they know the history of what the crystal sorceries cost? Do they know about the Pisaxes, about Logan's final state? And if they do know, why do they continue? What justification do you make for yourself when the tradition you uphold has a foundation of horror? Part 7. The Lies of Anor Londo, a city running on illusions. The first time you arrive in Anor Londo, after the brutal climb through Sen's fortress, the game does something remarkable. It gives you sunlight, actual warm, golden sunlight falling across white stone architecture of impossible grandeur. After everything dark and cramped and desperate that came before, the light of Anor Londo feels like a reward, like you have earned something. It is entirely fake. Mystery 37. How long has the illusion of Guinevere been running? Gwyn linked the flame and left Anor Londo. The other gods followed, retreating from the city. Gwendolyn stayed and created the illusion of his sister to maintain the appearance that the gods had not abandoned their city and their people. But how long ago was that? The game is deliberately vague about timelines, but the undead curse has been spreading long enough for entire civilizations to have grown up around managing it. Undead asylums were built and populated, and are apparently now falling apart from long use. The Way of White has been operating long enough to have its traditions encoded in architecture and ritual. Gwyn leaving was not recent. The illusion of Guinevere has been running for a very long time. Long enough that the original purpose of the deception, keeping the undead motivated to pursue the prophecy of the Chosen One, may have outlasted any actual expectation of success. Gwendolyn maintaining the city out of pure stubbornness, pure loyalty to a father who has been hollow ash for centuries. Mystery 38. Where did Ornstein actually go? Ornstein and Smo are the iconic double boss of Anor Londo. When you kill Smo first and Ornstein last, Ornstein's death is cinematically handled. The Golden Knight dissolves into light, shrinks, leaves behind only his armor. When you kill Ornstein first, Smough absorbs his power, and the aftermath is more visceral. The accepted interpretation is that the Ornstein you fight is either an illusion maintained by Gwendolyn or a leftover guardian animated by old loyalties. The real Ornstein, the one who was the first knight of Gwyn's firstborn son, left Anor Londo long ago to track the Nameless King. But if Ornstein left to find the Nameless King, did he find him? Is there a version of events where Ornstein and his former lord were reunited, where a knight devoted to the son of Gwyn eventually reached the Archdragon Peak and found the man he served? And if so, does that mean Ornstein is somewhere in those clouds, in some form, still? Dark Souls 3 places Ornstein's armor in the archives of Anor Londo, which could suggest that he came back, or that he never left, or simply that his things ended up there through some path the game does not trace. Mystery 39. Why do the Silver Knights stay? After Guinevere's illusion is dispelled, after Anor Londo goes dark and cold, the Silver Knights remain. Not the Sentinels, who vanish with the illusion, but the Silver Knights on the rooftops and in the halls. They stay. Armed and patrolling a city their gods have abandoned. Why? What is their loyalty to when the thing they were ostensibly guarding has been revealed as a fiction? Is it Gwendolyn they serve? Is it the idea of Anor Londo, the memory of what the city was? Is it something so deeply encoded in them that they continue their patrols without needing a conscious reason, the way soldiers continue fighting wars after the generals have gone home? The The Silver Knights in Anor Londo are one of the most quietly poignant presences in the game. They are guardians of an empty city, faithful to an absent god, maintaining a watch that no one asked them to maintain anymore. Mystery 40. What is the nature of Guinevere's departure? The real Guinevere left Anor Londo and married the flame god Flan. This is presented as a fact in item descriptions. But the real Guinevere is never encountered in any of the games. She moved on and built a life and simply stopped being part of the story. But here is a strange detail. In Dark Souls 3, in the Aldrich boss fight, Aldrich's visions seemed to contain images of Guinevere. The devourer of gods dreamed of devouring the princess as well as the dark sun Gwyndolin. Either he dreamed of the illusion as if it were real, or he had some access to the actual Guinevere's essence. Did Aldrich touch something of the real Guinevere through eating Gwyndolin? The sibling connection between them was so strong that Gwyndolin devoted his long existence to maintaining her image. Is there a version of events in which the real Guinevere is still somewhere in the Dark Souls 3 world, aged or transformed or simply hiding, and Aldrich somehow touched a thread of her soul through the brother she left behind? It is unanswerable, but it is the kind of question that sits in the quiet and does not let go. Part 8. Dark Souls 2. The kingdom that remembered everything was cyclical. Dark Souls 2 is, in many ways, the most philosophically explicit of the 3 games. Where the first game is content to let its themes emerge from the lore and the structure, Dark Souls 2 puts characters like Aldea in front of you and has them say things directly. The cycle is real. The repetition is real. The question is what, if anything, you can do about it. Mystery 41. What were Drangleic's real origins? King Vendrick founded Drangleic with the power of the Old Souls, the Lord Souls from the first game. According to Chancellor Welliger, this is the official history of the kingdom, but the mechanics of acquiring those souls in a new age, of building a nation on foundations that belong to a prior civilization, are obscure. Did Vendrick know where his power came from? Did he understand that he was building on the ash of Lordran, that the authority that made Drangleic possible was borrowed from dead gods? And if he knew, what did he think about that? The Vendrick we eventually find in the undead crypt is massive, slow, a giant hollowed king shambling in circles, too powerful to kill without the right preparation. He carries the weight of everything he knew and did nothing with it. He understood the cycle better than almost anyone else in the game's history. And he still could not stop it. Mystery 42. What is Nashandra's full history? Nashandra is a fragment of Manus, the father of the Abyss. When you defeat her in the throne of want, she falls and crumbles like something held together by will alone. But her history before arriving at Drangleic's court is almost entirely blank. She came from the dark. She found a fragmentary humanity and built herself a human form from it. She sought power because power was the closest thing her fragmented nature could focus into a goal. She manipulated Vendrick into going to war with the giants, setting up a conflict that would weaken him and pave her path to the throne. But what did she experience in the time between Manus's destruction at Oolacile and her emergence in Drangleic? Centuries passed. Nashandra as a being was, presumably, alive in some form during all of that time. Did she wander? Did she sleep in the dark? Did she feel things? The fragment of Manus that became her presumably retained some memory, some emotional residue of being him. Did she remember the pendant? Did she remember Oolacile? Is there grief in Nashandra? Or is she something so consumed by the single drive for power that grief, memory, and whatever was once human in her ancestor are simply not accessible? Mystery 43. What exactly is Aldea by the end? Aldea locked himself in his own keep, conducted experiments on giants, attempted to recreate a dragon, and then was not heard from again for a long time. When he reappears in Scholar of the First Sin, he is an enormous mass of branches and fire with a glowing red eye. He is barely recognizable as the person who started the experiments. What happened in the keep? What did he do to himself, and why? He was trying to find a path beyond the cycle of fire and dark, a third option that neither Framps Linking nor Kothi's Age of Dark could offer. He found something, or something found him. The transformation from scholar to burning tree creature suggests he passed through a threshold that human biology was not designed for. And yet his mind remained. his intelligence, his curiosity, his capacity for articulate philosophical dialogue, all intact. Aldea, unlike Seath or Logan before him, did not lose himself in the obsession. He changed, and he survived the change, and he emerged on the other side of something terrible still himself. What did he see? What is the thing that Aldea knows that cannot be communicated, only gestured toward in paradox and cryptic verse? Mystery 44. Who is the Emerald Herald really? The Emerald Herald, the pale woman in the green cape who levels you up in Dark Souls 2, tells you she was born from dragons. She believes this. But the in-game lore and NPC dialogue strongly suggests she was actually created by Aldea as an experiment, as an attempt to produce a human being free from the undead curse, a being who could grow and change and die naturally without the dark sign dragging them back. She does not know this. She believes what she was apparently told or what she intuited. Her companion in the opening of the game, the ancient dragon, is widely theorized to also be an Aldea creation rather than a genuine remnant of the everlasting dragons. The Emerald Herald is, in this reading, a lie walking, a being created to help others navigate toward a destination she does not fully understand, whose origin story is a comfortable fiction hiding a more painful truth. She was made, not born. Her memories may be artificial. Her entire concept of herself may be a construction by a man who used her as a data point in his experiments. Does she deserve to know? Would knowing make her less effective at her purpose? Is Aldea's continued silence about her origins an act of protection, or another layer of the manipulation that defines his character? Mystery 45. What are the primal bonfires, and why are they different from regular ones? Throughout Drangleic, after defeating certain major bosses, you light primal bonfires, enormous, brilliant fires that are visually and tonally distinct from the ordinary bonfires scattered through the world. They feel more significant, more charged, like something old is resonating in them. Their lore connection is to the old ones, the powerful souls that Vendrick collected to found his kingdom. The primal bonfires are connected to those foundational powers, remnants of Lord souls that have been burning since before Drangleic was built. But why are they separate from the regular bonfire network? What is special about these specific fires that they burn brighter and feel different and seem to carry more weight than the campfires scattered through dungeon corridors? Are they residual burn-off from the Lord Soul's power? Are they anchors, fixed points in the spiritual geography of the world that provide stability in a realm being pulled apart by the same cycle versus transcendence tension that destroyed Lordran? The game does not say. They simply burn, brilliant and enormous, and you warm your hands on them and move on. Part 9, Dark Souls 3, Londo, the Lord of Hollows, and the Final Question. If Dark Souls 1 is about the nature of the cycle, and Dark Souls 2 is about whether the cycle can be broken, Dark Souls 3 is about what happens at the very end of the cycle, when even the most powerful interventions have run out, and the flame is finally too weak to link meaningfully, and the question stops being, what should we do, and becomes, what is there left to do? Mystery 46. What would an Age of Dark actually look like? The usurpation of fire, ending in Dark Souls 3, shows the Ashen One absorbing the first flame, becoming the Lord of Hollows and standing in darkness. Yuria and Yoel's sisters flank you. Darkness gathers, and then the credits roll. We never see an Age of Dark, not in 3 games and numerous DLCs. We see the approach to it, the arguments for it, the beings who devoted their existence to bringing it about. But the actual substance of what a world without the first flame would look like for the people living in it, that is invisible to us. Would humans become something new, something that could only exist in the absence of fire's organizing light? Would the Hollows who fill every corner of the third game's world find some form of peace, some resolution to the endless erosion of their selves? Would the absence of the dark sign's burning constraint on the dark soul allow something extraordinary to emerge from humanity? Or would it simply be dark and cold and gradually emptying, all the souls that the flame sustained drifting away without that anchor, leaving a world of wandering shadows and fading memory? Kaathi wants it. Yuria wants it. The Hollows, in their lost way, want something, and perhaps that something is this. But we never see it. Mystery 47. Is the Lord of Hollows ending actually good or bad? Most discussions of Dark Souls 3's endings treat Link the Fire as the good option, End the Fire as the ambiguous option, and Usurp the Fire as the dark option. But that hierarchy is not supported by anything in the game itself. It is a cultural assumption built on the first game's framing of fire as positive. The Lord of Hollows ending absorbs the flame and puts a human, however modified, at the center of the world's metaphysical structure. Rather than having the flame sustained by endless cycles of self-sacrifice, rather than having it extinguished and leaving the world to slowly go dark, you become the thing the flame was burning for. You are both fire and dark. You are what Aldea was looking for, theoretically, though the approach is different. Is this better? Worse? A genuine third option, or just a differently labeled version of the same pattern? Mystery 48. Why did the Unkindled fail to link the flame the first time? The Unkindled are undead who attempted to link the flame in a prior cycle and were burned away. Ash. The implication is that they were not strong enough, or that they made some error, or that circumstances aligned against them. They were called to the bonfire, and could not complete what they were called to do. But the Ashen One, the player character of Dark Souls 3, was also unkindled, was also burned to ash in a prior attempt. The difference between the Ashen One and all the other unkindled who wander the world mindlessly is apparently the specific character of your will, the specific shape of your soul, something that makes you uniquely capable of what others could not accomplish. Except that framing has already been applied to the chosen undead of the first game, and to the bearer of the curse in the second game, and to every prior hero in every prior cycle. The game has been generating special undead for a very long time. What makes any of them actually special? Is there a quality of the soul that distinguishes a true protagonist from a failed one? Or is the distinction arbitrary, a function of being in the right place at the end of a very specific sequence of events? Mystery 49. What is Ludleth of Corlin hiding? Ludleth, the small pale lord who sits on a throne in Firelink Shrine and has already linked the flame once before, is one of the most narratively layered NPCs in the game. He is jovial, self-deprecating, genuinely helpful. He gives you the ability to transpose boss souls. He tells you things about the world and the fire that no one else mentions. He also has a profoundly guilty conscience. When you bring him the eyes of a firekeeper, he speaks about the owner of those eyes, about what they saw, about a foul betrayal. Ludleth's reaction implies personal knowledge of those events, not just historical awareness, but something closer to involvement. Did Ludleth cause the darkness in the untended graves? The untended graves is a version of Firelink Shrine left in permanent darkness, frozen at a moment of abandonment. The firekeeper who owned the blinded eyes was connected to that place. Ludleth, the one who warns you about giving her the eyes back, was also there. What did Ludleth do? Why does he feel guilty? What was his role in the creation of a version of Firelink Shrine that exists in permanent lightless suspension? He never fully answers these questions. He says enough to make you suspect something, and then retreats into his cheerful, self-deprecating manner, and you are left with suspicion and no resolution. Mystery 50. What is the coiled sword fragment, and why does it allow instant warp? In Firelink Shrine, there is a coiled sword fragment that allows you to use it like a bonfire anywhere in the world. It is described as a fragment of a coiled sword embedded in the Firelink bonfire, but it does not describe where the other fragments are, or why this specific piece has the property it does. The coiled sword itself is one of the franchise's more mysterious objects. It is ancient. It is tied to the first flame in ways that go beyond ordinary bonfire kindling. And a fragment of it lets you step outside the normal bonfire network and rest anywhere, as if you are carrying a portable anchor of the fire itself. Why does this work? What is the spiritual logic of carrying a piece of the flame's ignition point and using it to create temporary safe harbor? And where is the rest of the sword, the coiled sword that presumably still exists in some form, with this fragment missing from it? Part 10. The Firekeeper and the Untended Graves. Mirrors and shadows of a known world. One of the most disquieting moments in Dark Souls 3 is finding the alternate Firelink Shrine. You descend through the consumed King's Garden, push through a door that leads somewhere unexpected, and emerge in a version of the place you have been calling home since the beginning of the game, but the fire is out. The music is wrong. The thrones are empty and cold. The sky through the windows is wrong, not night, but a kind of total darkness, the absence of sky. And the firekeeper is there. Not your firekeeper. One who died with her eyes intact, whose body still clutches those eyes, the ones your firekeeper has been missing since before the game began. Mystery 51. What happened in the untended graves? The space is called the untended graves. The graves outside in the dark version of the cemetery you traversed near the beginning of the game are unlit, untended, abandoned. Something ended here. Something closed. Champion Gundyr is the boss of this area, a version of Iudex Gundyr, the tutorial boss of the main game, but corrupted, dark, without the coiled sword in his chest, without the framing narrative of being tested. He is simply fighting, endlessly, desperately, in a dark shrine with no purpose left to anchor his battles. What is the relationship between the untended graves and the Firelink Shrine you know? Are they the same place at different times? The same place in different worlds? The same place in a reality that forked at some point? One version where the fire was maintained, and one where it was not? And who is the firekeeper whose body sits in the darkness? Is she the same firekeeper you have been talking to from a prior cycle? A parallel version who made a different choice? Someone who tried to end the fire and was killed for it? Mystery 52. Why is Iudex Gundyr the first thing you fight? Gundyr's story, assembled from item descriptions, is of a champion who came to link the flame and arrived too late. The bonfire had already died, and the moment had passed. He could not complete his purpose. He was sealed in the cemetery, frozen in the act of preparing to fight, a coiled sword shoved into his chest to contain whatever he had become. When you arrive, you pull the sword out, which apparently destabilizes whatever was keeping him dormant. He attacks. You defeat him. And then the area you are in becomes Firelink Shrine. The firelights, the music changes, the world opens up. But why is Gundyr there at all? If a champion arrived at the right time in the right cycle, why would they seal a failed champion at the entrance to the shrine as a guardian? Is Gundyr a test? Is sealing would-be champions in the graveyard a standard part of the cycle, a way of weeding out the unworthy before they can access the flame? Or was Gundyr's placement there an accident, a body that no one got around to dealing with before the cycle turned again, and new undead began to arrive? Mystery 53. What did the firekeeper see with her eyes? The eyes of a firekeeper show the end of fire, the true end. Not the managed fading that every cycle manages and restores, but the actual cessation of the first flame. What the world looks like when the fire is genuinely, permanently gone. It is apparently so distressing that Gwendolyn's version of the eyes, the ones your firekeeper has been without since before the game began, show the world's darkness so clearly that having them is described by Ludlith as a temptation toward betrayal. They are eyes that, once used, make the case for ending the fire, because they show what the fire is actually doing to the world by continuing to burn. What does your firekeeper feel when you give her those eyes? She sees something vast and dark. She says she can see something that should not be. She offers you the ending where the flame goes out. She wants to grant you eyes, she says. She wants to show you what she is seeing. What is she seeing? What terrible truth sits at the end of the fire that makes even the firekeeper, a being whose entire existence is in service of the flame, want to be part of the thing that ends it? Mystery 54. What is the Firelink Shrine actually built on? There is a suggestion in the environmental design of Firelink Shrine that it has layers, that the current version sits on top of older versions, that below the stone floor there are depths that contain the residue of prior cycles. The undead grave level below the shrine suggests downward continuity. The way the architecture echoes motifs from both the first and second games suggests that the designers were thinking of Firelink as a location that persists across ages, rebuilt over its own ruins. If the cycle has been running long enough, and all evidence suggests it has been running for an incomprehensible amount of time, then the bonfire at Firelink Shrine is not the first bonfire in that location. It is the most recent instance of a fire that has been lit and gone out, and been lit again in that spot, over and over, for as long as the cycle has been turning. What is underneath? What did the first Firelink shrine look like? Who sat at it? Are there layers of human ash and soul residue beneath the stone? A geological record of every lost undead who warmed themselves there in ages long past. Part 11. The Painted World. What happens when a world is made to end? The Painted World appears twice in the Dark Souls series. Once as an optional area in the first game, a place of snow and corpses and a very polite dragon-human hybrid who asks you to leave her alone, and once as the setting of the Ashes of Ariandel DLC in Dark Souls 3, now decaying and burning, with a woman inside it who is desperately trying to prevent anyone from doing what needs to be done. Mystery 55. Who made the first Painted World? In Dark Souls 1, the Painted World of Ariamis is a place of exile. Things are put there when they cannot be easily destroyed and cannot be tolerated in the normal world. Crossbreed Priscilla, the boss of the area, was placed there because she was a being born of a union that the gods apparently found offensive, the implied offspring of Seath and Guinevere, or some other combination of the divine and draconic. But who made the world she was placed in? Who had the ability to create an entire painted world, an enclosed dimensional pocket with its own weather and geography and population, and use it as an exile space? The implication across both appearances is that painted worlds are created by Sable Church-affiliated pyromancers, by beings with deep mastery of a particular kind of fire magic. But the first painted world predates anything connected to Londor that we know about. It feels older than that. Was it Gwyn? Was exiling Priscilla his idea? And was the painted world a creation he commissioned? Are there other painted worlds scattered across the Dark Souls cosmology, each holding something too inconvenient to destroy and too dangerous to leave free? Mystery 56. Who is Priscilla's other parent? Priscilla is the crossbreed. Her name alone marks her as something that resulted from a union that was not supposed to happen. Her appearance, tall, white-haired, with a dragon tail, and her weapons and magic all suggest draconic heritage. Seath is the most frequently theorized father, but her mother? No in-game source confirms who bore her. The implication is that her divine half came from one of Gwyn's lineage, possibly Guinevere, given that Priscilla's voice acting is shared with the sounds from Guinevere's chamber. Possibly one of Gwyn's daughters. Was her conception consensual? Was it something Seath arranged through his research? Another experiment with a living subject? Was it something else entirely? A political arrangement, a magical accident, an event so complicated and painful that the gods chose to put the result in a painted box and never speak of it again? Priscilla herself does not seem to carry overt trauma. She is gentle. She is courteous. She asks you to leave her alone with a quiet dignity that suggests she has made peace with her situation. But the situation she has made peace with, perpetual exile in a box for the crime of being born, is one that deserves to be interrogated. Mystery 57. What is the relationship between Ariamis and Ariandel? Two painted worlds, both named with Aria as the root, both managed by women who are deeply invested in controlling what happens inside them. Priscilla in the first, Frida in the second. Is Ariandel a sequel to Ariamis? Was it painted by someone who knew about Ariamis, who wanted to create a similar space? Or are they entirely unrelated painted worlds that simply share naming conventions, because the technique that creates them was developed by a specific school of thought that named its creations in a particular way? In Ariandel, the painting is rotting, the world inside it is dying. Father Ariandel, the enormous hollow giant who pours rot into the world's floor and weeps and tries to paint even as everything falls apart, represents the desperate attempt to maintain a dying creation. The painting needs to burn in order to be reborn, but Frida, who came to the painting, found it beautiful and decided to protect it, will not let anyone light the torch. This mirrors, very directly, the broader Dark Souls theme of refusing the necessary destruction in favor of protecting something familiar. Frida's relationship to the painted world reflects the broader civilizational choice to link the fire and preserve the age, rather than let it end and allow something new to grow. But the specific connection between Ariamis and Ariandel, whether they are iterations of each other, parallel creations, or entirely separate things, is never confirmed. Mystery 58. Who was Sister Frida before she came to the Painted World? Frida is Elfrida, the oldest of the three sisters who founded the Sable Church of Londor. She was unkindled, which means she once tried to link the flame or usurp it and burned away to ash. She came to the Painted World of Ariandel and found something she wanted to protect, and she has been protecting it ever since. But what did she do between founding the Sable Church and arriving at Ariandel? The Sable Church devoted itself to Ka'athi's agenda of the Age of Dark. It spent enormous energy creating the conditions that would allow a Lord of Hollows to usurp the flame. Elfrida abandoned that mission. Why? What changed? What did she see or experience or realize that made the agenda of the Sable Church, the thing she helped build, feel wrong? Was it ideological? Personal? Did something terrible happen during the effort to usurp the flame in her prior cycle? Something that burned away not just her body, but her faith in the project? She arrived in a painted world and decided to preserve it instead of help it burn and be reborn. There is a story between the founding of the Sable Church and that decision. We only have the before and the after. Mystery 59. What happens to a painted world when the painting itself is destroyed? In the DLC, the quest culminates with a new painting being created from the ash of Ariandel's burning. A young woman named Slave Knight Gale, after retrieving the Dark Soul, creates the pigment for a new painting. The painter girl creates a new world. What happened to Ariamis when Ariandel was painted? Did the original world continue to exist? Is Priscilla still in there, still walking through the snow, still asking visitors to leave? Or did the creation of Ariandel somehow supersede Ariamis, the way a new flame supersedes the old one? And what becomes of the world you played through, the burning Ariandel, when the new painting is finished? Do the remnants of it persist, or does the act of creating the new world collapse the old one back into canvas and pigment? Painted worlds end. That is the conclusion Frida could not accept and Ariandel's story could not avoid. But the mechanics of those endings, what they mean for the beings inside them, are not resolved. Part 12. Slave Knight Zell, the Dark Soul, and the End of All Things. In a franchise that treats every heroic act as ambivalent, every sacrifice as double-edged, every victory as the seed of a future failure, Slave Knight Gale is unusual. He is, by the end of his arc, one of the most straightforwardly tragic figures in the series. A man who set out to do a single good thing and spent so long in the attempt that the attempt consumed him entirely. Mystery 60. What was Gale before he became a slave knight? His ashes say he was a slave knight who served a painter. His equipment description mentions that he was a very old knight who survived long past his prime by pure stubbornness. But the circumstances of his earliest life, before the painter, before the quest for the Dark Soul's pigment, are blank. Was he always a slave knight? The title implies a specific social position, someone at the bottom of a hierarchy of service, someone who chose or was forced into absolute devotion to a cause or person. Was he born into that? Did he choose it? Was there a life before the painter that shaped the person who later decided to undertake an impossible quest? We meet him briefly at the beginning of the Ashes of Ariandel DLC, accompanying the painter, already ancient. He disappears into the painting to find the pigment he needs. We find him at the very end, in the ashen desert at the edge of the broken ringed city, having consumed every surviving pygmy lord's dark soul in a desperate effort to gather enough dark to create what the painter needs. He is enormous by that point, changed. The Dark Soul's humanity has overwhelmed him in the same way Manus was overwhelmed. He cannot communicate anymore. He can only fight. And the player kills him, takes the pigment from his blood, and brings it back to the painter girl, who creates a new world from the death of the person who cared most about her painting. Mystery 61. Why did the pygmy lords allow themselves to be consumed? The ringed city's pygmy lords are sleeping when you find them, sealed in stone rings around the cathedral. Gale consumed them, drank their dark souls. But the item descriptions suggest this was not entirely a violence. Some of the pygmy lords may have given themselves to Gale willingly, understanding what he was trying to accomplish. If so, why? Why would the direct descendants of the furtive pygmy, bearers of the original dark soul that humanity inherited, willingly give their souls to an old slave knight on a quest for paint? Did they understand that the cycle was ending? That the Age of Dark was approaching regardless of their choices, and that contributing to the creation of a new painted world was a way of ensuring something continued even if the world outside the painting ceased? Were they investing in a future that their current world no longer had access to? The Pygmy Lords are some of the most mysterious figures in the franchise. Their origin is ancient, their purpose in the Ringed City is to be contained, and their final act appears to be a gift. The full meaning of that gift is not spelled out. Mystery 62. What does the new painted world become? The game ends. The entire Dark Souls 3 experience ends, with the painter girl beginning to paint a new world using the pigment of Gale's blood. She says she wants to paint a cold, dark, and gentle place. Cold and dark and gentle. She is the child of a dying world, creating a new one. The description of what she wants to make suggests something entirely unlike Lordran, or Drangleic, or Lothric. No fire cycles, no undead curse, no great wars over flame. Something quieter, colder, self-contained. Is that what she makes? Is the world she paints a better one? Does it have problems of its own? Every world has problems. Every created thing carries the flaws of its creator, and the painter girl was born in chaos and loss, and surrounded by people who failed at every level to prevent the end of the world she inhabited. But she is also not any of those people. She is new. She has not been through enough cycles to have the pattern burned into her thinking. Maybe she makes something that is genuinely different. We will never know. The credits roll before the first stroke is finished. Mystery 63. Who is Filianor's egg? The petrified egg that Filianor cradles in the Ringed City is described as a divine child. Gwyn supposedly sent Filianor to the Ringed City to soothe its people, and the egg was part of that purpose. When you break it, when you disturb Filianor's sleep by touching the egg, the world collapses forward in time, shattering the protected moment that Filianor was anchoring. What is inside the egg? Is it a literal child, some divine being in a prenatal state, waiting for a world that never quite became ready for it? Is it a metaphor, an idea of future possibility that Gwyn packaged into an object to keep his people hoping? Is it a key of some kind, something that, if it had been properly used, might have broken the cycle in a less catastrophic way? The egg breaks. The moment ends. The Ringed City slides forward into ash and the final confrontation with Gale. And the divine child, whatever it was, is simply gone. Not freed, not lost, just gone. Some gifts are never opened in time. Mystery 64 through 75. Connections across ages. The threads that bind all three games. These are the smaller mysteries, the details that sit at the edges of the main stories and suggest depths that even the central narratives do not fully plumb. Mystery 64. Why does the pursuer in Dark Souls 2 follow the bearer of the curse specifically? His lore says he hunts down a specific individual based on a grudge no one alive can explain. What did the bearer do in some prior loop of the cycle to earn that obsession? Mystery 65. What happened to the painted world of Ariamis between Dark Souls 1 and 3? We see it in 1, optional and peaceful. We hear nothing about it in 2 or 3. Did it continue to exist parallel to all the world-ending events of the subsequent games? Is Priscilla still there? Mystery 66. Where does the Moonlight Greatsword come from originally? It appears in every From Software game, always as a weapon of immense magical power that does not quite fit the world around it. In Dark Souls, it is Seath's tail. In Bloodborne, it is a weapon found in an otherworldly location. The consistent presence of this one weapon across entirely different settings suggests it has a history that transcends any single lore. Mystery 67. What are the primordial serpents' actual bodies? We see their faces and upper forms, but the depths of the pools they emerge from never bottom out. Is what we see the entirety of them, or just the tip of something much larger? Mystery 68. Why does Andre the Blacksmith appear in both Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3? He is the same character, sitting at the same spot in Firelink Shrine, ostensibly thousands of years apart. He is not the same in the way Hollows repeat behaviors. He is lucid, personable, aware. Is Andre immortal? Is he not human in the way he appears? Has he been sitting at forges across every cycle, hammering metal through the end of multiple ages? Mystery 69. Who is the narrator of the Dark Souls 1 opening cinematic? A woman's voice, grave and slow, telling you the history of the world. She is never identified. She knows things that very few beings could know. The arrangement at the first flame, the nature of the Lord's souls, the history of Gwyn and the dragons. Who is she? What is her stake in the story she is telling? Mystery 70. What are the basilisks, and why do their eyes cause curse? They are described as neither fully living nor fully dead, their eyeballs producing the white mist that crystallizes into curse-inducing energy. But no lore explains their origin. Did they form from the abyss? Are they related to the primordial serpents in some way? Are they something much older, a creature from the age of ancients that survived by virtue of inhabiting deep places? Mystery 71. What is the nature of Velka, the goddess of sin? She appears only through her statues, her covenant, and the items associated with her, but she is one of the most quietly influential figures in the entire game. She keeps records of sins. Her partner cleanses them for a price. Her name is invoked in connections to Gwendolyn's magic. Who is Velka? Where does she come from? And why is sin-keeping a divine function that warrants its own goddess? Mystery 72. Who built the undead asylums? The asylum at the beginning of Dark Souls 1 is clearly old, weathered, fallen into disrepair. It was designed to hold large numbers of undead. It was built somewhere remote and inaccessible. Whoever built it had both the resources to construct an elaborate prison and the political power to mandate sending the market there. Was it Gwyn, the Way of White, whose affiliated knight Oscar dies in the opening? Some prior civilization that solved the problem of undead by simply containing them? Mystery 73. What happened to the 4 knights of Gwyn after the Age of Fire? Gwyn had 4 great knights: Hawkeye Goff, Dragonslayer Ornstein, Artorias the Abyss Walker, and Lord's Blade Ciaran. Artorias fell in Oolacile. Ornstein left to find the Nameless King. Goff was blinded and placed in a tower in Oolacile. Ciaran mourned Artorias at his grave and then vanished. All 4 had endings, but none had resolutions. Mystery 74. Why does the dusk of Oolacile end up crystallized in a golem in the present day? After the events of the DLC, after everything that happened in Oolacile's past, Dusk somehow became trapped in a crystal golem in the present-day Darkroot Basin. She had been in stasis there long enough that she had no idea what year it was. How does a princess from 200 to 300 years ago end up preserved in a crystal construction in the modern era? Was it Seath's work? And the unintended effect of the abyss, something that time travel did to her? Mystery 75. What is the significance of the Iron Golem's position in Sen's fortress? The Iron Golem guards the top of Sen's fortress, the only way to reach Anor Londo. The fortress itself is a challenge designed to test undead before they can meet the gods. But the Iron Golem is enormous, mechanical, ancient. It predates the undead curse in its design. Was it built as part of the original path to Anor Londo, when the gods still lived there and visitors were expected? Or was it placed by someone later, maintaining a gate that had originally opened freely? Part 13. Mysteries of Magic. What are souls, really? Magic in Dark Souls is a reflection of the lore in miniature. Every school of magic has a philosophy embedded in it. Sorcery uses souls as fuel, literally drawing on the energy of the self and the world. Miracles are granted by the gods, by faith. Pyromancy is pure primal fire, the most egalitarian magic, requiring no faith or intelligence, just a willingness to feed on the flame. Dark magic is the application of humanity's inherent darkness. Mystery 76. Why does soul magic cause more damage the more intelligence a user has, rather than more soul energy? Souls are not intellectual. They are the fundamental substance of identity, present in animals, in hollows, in beings with no perceptible intelligence at all. The specific relationship between mental capacity and soul-based power is never explained. Mystery 77. What is the relationship between pyromancy and the Witch of Izalith? Pyromancy is ancient, descending from the witch's original flame manipulation. But the witch herself attempted to recreate the first flame from her own soul and produce the flame of chaos instead, the flame that created demons and destroyed Izalith. Pyromancy, in this reading, is a tradition descended from a catastrophic failure. Why does it still work? Why does working with fire not carry the same risk of chaos that destroyed the witch's entire civilization? Mystery 78. What is the nature of the dark sorceries that Oolacile developed before its fall? Oolacile's golden magic was light-based, gentle, non-offensive in its original conception. The dark sorceries they developed by studying their own tortured citizens' humanity were its corrupted successor. Those dark sorceries still exist in later ages, accessible in all three games. What sustains them? The civilization that created them was destroyed. The philosophy that informed them, tortured empiricism on the nature of humanity, is one of the darkest chapters in the franchise's history. Why does that knowledge persist when so much else is lost? Mystery 79. Is there a limit to how many times the undead can die and return before something changes permanently? The game mechanically allows infinite respawns, but lorically there are suggestions that every death costs something. The gradual process of hollowing is partly attributed to repeated cycles of death and revival. Is there a number? A threshold? A point at which the dark sign simply gives up and lets the undead hollow fully? Mystery 80. What happens to the souls the player absorbs from enemies? When you kill an enemy and absorb their souls, those souls, which are described as the fundamental substance of identity in life, go into you. You grow stronger. But what happens to the person who was carrying those souls? Are they permanently destroyed? Do they lose something of who they were? Is the economy of the game, which is built on killing things to get stronger, actually built on the permanent destruction of irreplaceable identity? Part 14. World-building mysteries, the things that don't add up. Some mysteries in Dark Souls are not about grand cosmic questions. They are about the details that do not quite fit, the world-building specifics that raise their hands quietly in the back of the room and ask an uncomfortable question that no one ever gets around to answering. Mystery 81. Where do the giant blacksmiths come from? Giants appear across all three games in different contexts, as enemies, as NPCs, as beings that Vendrick kidnapped from across the sea. But giant blacksmiths appear in both Dark Souls 1 and 3, peacefully working at forges in divine cities. What is the relationship between the giants as an enemy race and the giant blacksmiths as peaceful craftspeople? Mystery 82. What is the significance of the Dragon Head Stone and the Dragon Body Stone in Dark Souls 1? They are items given through the path of the Dragon Covenant, allowing the player to physically transform into a dragon. The Covenant is tied to Seath's defeat. You must cut off his tail to access parts of it, but the Covenant itself seems to predate Seath. Who created it? Was it a tradition from the Age of Ancients? A way of honoring or accessing draconic power that existed before Gwyn's war? Mystery 83. What are the crystal lizards, and what do they have to do with the First Flame? Crystal lizards drop upgrade materials that are essential for improving weapons. They are elusive, skittish, and seem to exist in places connected to the flame's power, near bonfires, in locations of magical significance. Are they some kind of natural creature that feeds on soul residue? A Seath creation? Something else entirely? Mystery 84. Why does New Londo exist in a flooded state? The Great Hollow and Ash Lake below New Londo suggest an enormous vertical geography to Lordran, with the city sitting on a kind of ledge above a vast root system and underground ocean. New Londo was flooded by the Watchers specifically to contain the Dark Wraiths and the Four Kings, a deliberately catastrophic solution to a very specific problem. But the flooding of an entire city as containment feels extreme even by Dark Souls standards. What exactly were they afraid the Four Kings could do if allowed to continue? Mystery 85. What is Ash Lake? At the very bottom of the Great Hollow, through an enormous tree root system, is a vast lake of white ash under a gray sky and enormous petrified trees. Clams walk in the shallows. An everlasting dragon sits on a root. There is a bonfire there, of all things. Who uses it? Who put it there? What has ever lived at the bottom of the world, in this silent gray place that seems to belong to an age before fire? Mystery 86. How does the player character travel to the ringed city at the end of time, when that city is supposed to be at the end of the world? The DLC uses the premise of throwing yourself into the kiln of the First Flame to be transported to the ringed city, but the mechanics of that are never explained. You jump into dying fire, and land at the beginning of a DLC? Why does the kiln connect to the end of time and the edge of the world? What is the metaphysical relationship between the kiln and the ringed city? Mystery 87. Who is Hawkwood and what is he walking away from? Hawkwood the deserter in Dark Souls 3 is a disgraced Ashen One who gave up. He was called back to link the fire, decided it was pointless, and essentially quit. He sits in Firelink Shrine radiating cynicism and regret. But his specific history, what he saw or did in his time before deserting, is never filled in. He becomes a boss fight eventually, if you follow the path of the Ancient Dragon Covenant, but even that conflict is more about his attitude toward the path than his history. Mystery 88. What is the smoldering lake and what feeds it? Beneath the catacombs of Karthus, there is a vast underground lake of fire. Demons wander it, black knights hunt them. An enormous worm crosses the center like a meteor. The smoldering lake feels like the echo of Izalith, a place touched by the flame of chaos, still burning with a corruption that the original catastrophe planted. But it also feels like something else, something that might have been burning independently of Izalith's fall. What is the fire source under the lake, and how long has it been burning? Mystery 89. Why can the player summon phantoms, other players' ghosts, to help with boss fights? Mechanically, it is a multiplayer feature, but within the lore, the summoning mechanic is described as reaching across worlds, pulling echoes of other undead into your own reality for temporary assistance. What is the mechanism? Is it the bonfire network that allows it? Is it the dark sign, connecting all undead across realities? Is it something that was designed by someone, or a natural consequence of the way the curse and the bonfires interact across parallel instances of the same world? Mystery 90. What is the dark chasm of old in Dark Souls 2? A hidden area of pure darkness through which the bearer of the curse must pass to complete Lucatiel's quest line. A lightless void filled with human specters, echoes of people consumed by the abyss. The chasm feels like a staging ground between worlds, a place where those who have gone hollow or gone dark wait in some indefinite state. Is it part of the abyss proper, a pocket of it that formed under Drangleic? Something the game created as a storytelling space without fully theorizing its place in the cosmos? Part 15. The Final 50. From small wonders to the deepest abyssal questions, we are more than halfway through our 150 mysteries, and the night is growing quieter around you. Your breathing, if you are paying attention, has probably slowed. The questions are becoming less urgent and more dreamy, the way thoughts do when sleep is nearby. Let these last mysteries wash over you. You do not need to solve them. You do not need to remember them in the morning. Just let them pass through you like water, each one a small door into somewhere strange and beautiful and dark. Mystery 91. What exactly is the relationship between Velka and the Dark Moon Covenant? Her pardoner Oswald of Karim removes sin that the Dark Moon Blades pursue sinners for. Two systems, apparently opposed. One removes guilt, one punishes it, and yet both run on the same theology of sin and judgment. Did Velka and Gwendolyn coordinate, or did two separate divine traditions develop parallel systems that happen to interact? Mystery 92. Why are there so many Lord Vessels in the Firelink altar? The altar where you place the Lord Vessel already has multiple Lord Vessels visible on it when you arrive, discarded or placed by prior undead who reach this point. How many chosen undead have come before? How many reached this exact spot, placed the Lord Vessel, and then failed or succeeded or made choices that closed off their story before it reached a proper conclusion? Mystery 93. What is the true nature of Dark Sun Gwendolyn's serpent body? Below the waist, Gwendolyn has a form that transitions from humanoid to something else, multiple serpentine extensions rather than legs. The item description says the power of the moon was strong in Gwendolyn, and he was raised as a daughter. The serpent aspect is never explained by his moon affiliation alone. Is it a physical manifestation of divine corruption? A draconic inheritance from some line of Gwyn's ancestry? The mark of something very old trying to emerge through a divine body? Mystery 94. What happened in Izalith between the witch's attempt to recreate the flame and the player's arrival? The entire civilization became demons. The witch herself became the bed of chaos, a writhing mass of root and fire, an insect life, a creature that is simultaneously a living being and an environmental hazard. The daughters of the witch became pyromancers or flame creatures, or lost their humanity in other ways. What was the process? Did it happen all at once, or gradually over time? Were there survivors, people of Izalith who were not transformed? Did anyone escape? Mystery 95. Who is the undead woman who appears at the end of the undead asylum on repeat visits? If you return to the starting area after progressing significantly in the game, a new NPC appears briefly before throwing herself from a great height. She says nothing coherent. She leaves behind the peculiar doll that allows you to enter the painted world of Ariamis. Who is she? Why does she have that item? Why does she do what she does? Mystery 96. What is the significance of the mimic chests? Mimics, enemies disguised as treasure chests, are a common hazard in the game, but their lore, such as it is, implies they are actual creatures that evolved or were created to resemble containers. Why? Who would create such a thing, and for what purpose? They have teeth and a long tongue and a hunger for human flesh. They are nightmarish not because they attack you, but because they were designed to be patient in their resemblance to something harmless. Mystery 97. What are the mushroom parents and children in Darkroot Garden? Enormous, peaceful mushroom creatures that only attack if provoked, wandering through the forest near Seath's territory. They have no item descriptions that explain their nature. They are simply there. Are they a natural species of the forest? A Seath experiment that developed beyond his control? Something much older, a remnant of the Age of Ancients that found a niche in the New World's ecology? Mystery 98. What happened to the gods who left Anor Londo? We know they left. We do not know where they went. In Dark Souls 3, there are references to the gods having retreated from the world, and the game's ending landscapes have a quality of divine abandonment, grand architecture that nobody inhabits, altars that nobody tends. But where the gods physically went, what they intended to do when they got there, and whether any of them survived to the era of the third game in any meaningful form, these are questions the lore does not answer. Mystery 99. Why can the four kings in New Londo drain your humanity on death? The four kings were once great human rulers of New Londo who were given power by Gwyn through Kaathi. Kaathi gave them a boon in exchange for creating a dark wraith covenant that would drain humanity from the living. But the specific mechanism of the drain, the way that dying to the kings costs you not just your souls, but your humanity, implies a direct connection between these kings and the Dark Soul. Did Kaathi give them access to the ability to harvest the Dark Soul directly from the living? Mystery 100. What is the Great Hollow? The enormous hollow tree that connects the surface of Lordran to Ash Lake passes through dozens of levels of root and branching growth, with crystal lizards and large rats and an oppressive sense of being inside something alive. The tree is the size of a mountain. There are no other trees like it in the world. What is it? An arch tree from the Age of Ancients? Somehow still alive after everything that happened? A natural feature that simply grew without anyone tending it or understanding it? The game places a bonfire at the bottom of it and lets you emerge into Ash Lake and never asks you to explain what you just walked through. Mystery 101. Who is the primordial human Manus was before the abyss consumed him? We are told he was ancient, the most ancient human perhaps. But humans in the Dark Souls universe are not ancient in the way the game implies. The Age of Fire is when humans appeared, drawn from the Dark Soul. Before the Age of Fire, there were no humans. So, who was Manus before human civilization existed in any recognized form? Was he the furtive pygmy himself? A direct descendant? Something that blurs the line between the original Dark Soul holder and whatever came after? Mystery 102. What does a truly complete soul look like? Gwyn possessed a Lord Soul of extraordinary power. The Dark Soul, distributed across all of humanity, was supposedly the greatest, but we never see either in its complete form. Gwyn's soul has been depleted by his linking of the flame, and the Dark Soul has been fragmented beyond the point of reassembly. What would a complete soul, fully realized, fully powered, actually be? What would a being look like who had not diminished or divided their soul at all? Mystery 103. Why does the Ringed City exist at the literal end of the world, rather than somewhere more accessible? Gwyn sent his daughter there to soothe its people. The city was built to contain the Pygmy Lords. It sits at the edge of the world's geography, requiring passage through dying fire to reach. Was the inaccessibility intentional? Was the ringed city built where it is precisely because Gwyn wanted it difficult to reach? Because the pygmy lords inside it were a resource, or a threat, or both? And placing them at the edge of known geography was a way of keeping them apart from the centers of power? Mystery 104. What are the Dark Moon spirits, and why do they carry such grief? The Covenant of the Dark Moon is one of the most beautiful in the game, dedicated to delivering divine punishment to the sinful. But the Dark Moon spirits who deliver that punishment feel mournful rather than righteous. They are not warrior spirits executing justice. They are something more like echoes of mourning, sadness dressed in blue light. Why does Gwendolyn's covenant carry sorrow rather than pride? Mystery 105. What is Lothric of Carim actually loyal to? Lothric is the knight you meet imprisoned in the undead parish. You free him, and he murders the firekeeper of Firelink Shrine, extinguishing your bonfire. He is wearing armor connected to Carim, a religious city associated with dark worship, and he was imprisoned in a city nominally under the church's authority. What exactly was he doing, and why? His motivation for killing the firekeeper is never clearly stated. He speaks of her as a slave, suggests her presence was an offense of some kind, but the theology underlying that conviction remains opaque. Mystery 106. What is it like to be the firekeeper? Your firekeeper in Dark Souls 1 sits in the bonfire room, blinded, tending the flame, unable to move from her spot. In 3, the firekeeper can leave the bonfire but remains centered on it. What is their subjective experience? What do they feel as the fire burns through them? What is the quality of the time they spend there, between the arrivals of undead, in the empty hours when no one needs them? Mystery 107. Why does the dark sign always appear as a ring of fire, a brand of fire on the flesh of the dark? The symbolism is clear enough in the abstract. Fire surrounding darkness, the age of fire constraining the dark soul. But who designed that specific iconography? Who decided that the curse would mark itself on the skin in this particular way? A disease does not choose its presentation. Something designed it. Mystery 108. What are the crow demons in the painted world of Ariamis? Large crow humanoid beings that appear nowhere else in the game, clustered in the painted world's main courtyard. They are deeply strange, not quite animal, not quite human, with an unsettling combination of features. Were they something that was placed in the painted world like Priscilla, creatures that could not be handled elsewhere and were contained here? Were they residents of the world that the painting was made from, a real landscape that the painting captured? Mystery 109. What is the significance of Knight Solaire's solitude? Solaire travels alone. He does not belong to any official organization. He seeks the sun, specifically, as a personal quest rather than a religious one. He says he wants to find his very own sun. That phrase, not the sun, not a son, but his very own, suggests something more personal than simple faith. Was there a sun that was taken from him? A specific light he once had and lost? Is his quest through Lordran actually a quest to find something he remembers rather than something he imagines? Mystery 110. What would happen if you refused the Lord Vessel? In the game, after defeating Ornstein and Smo and receiving the Lord Vessel from the illusory Guinevere, you are expected to place it at the Firelink altar. Kingseeker Frampt urges you toward this. The game's main quest requires it. But the Lord Vessel is simply an item, a cup-shaped object you carry. Nothing forces you to use it immediately. Is the prophecy of the chosen undead actually a prophecy, or is it a social pressure? If you carried the Lord Vessel forever and never placed it, what would happen to the world around you? Mystery 111. Who are the crestfallen warriors, and where do they come from? In every Dark Souls game, there is a version of the crestfallen warrior, an undead who has been here before you, who has tried and given up, who sits at the first bonfire and radiates the specific texture of exhausted defeat. They always have some information. They always have the air of someone who was once exactly where you are now. Are they the same person in different cycles? Different people who reach the same emotional state through different paths? A type that the world generates because its structure requires it. Someone to greet each new arrival with honest discouragement? Mystery 112. Why does the Gravelord Covenant work the way it does? Nito, the first of the dead, offers a covenant in which the player can send Gravelord swords to other players' worlds, increasing enemy difficulty as a form of curse. But the lore of this covenant, the specific deal being made, the nature of Nito's interest in spreading difficulty through other undead's worlds, none of that is explained. What does Nito gain from making other undead's journeys harder? Mystery 113. What is the nature of the Dark Moon tomb beneath Anor Londo? The tomb is dedicated to Gwyn, but Gwyn is not buried there. He is in the kiln of the First Flame. His children worshipped in this tomb. His statues are there, but it is a tomb without a body, a memorial for a living absence. Was it built before he linked the flame, in anticipation, or was it built after, as a place to direct the grief of those he left behind? Mystery 114. What happened to the Way of White between Dark Souls 1 and 3? The Way of White is one of the oldest covenants in the first game, associated with Allfather Lloyd, uncle to Gwyn. By the third game, Lloyd is apparently considered a false god, and the Way of White seems to have been absorbed into the Church of the Deep in some form, or simply faded. But the transition from being one of the most prominent religious organizations in Lordran to being a historical footnote is never narrated. Mystery 115. What are the stone giants in Dark Souls 2, actually? Not the giant enemies reskinned, the literal stone giants, the humanoid shapes carved into or formed from stone that serve as guardians in certain locations. Are they animated by magic? Are they creatures that grew naturally from stone, the same way the stone knights in Darkroot Garden feel like they grew rather than were built? Are they remnants of an age of ancients' technology, stone given something like life in a world before fire could give it soul? Mystery 116. What exactly was the first sin? Aldia's game and DLC are named after it. The first sin is described as the fundamental error that set the cycle of fire and dark in motion, or perhaps the error that made the cycle inescapable. Gwyn's linking of the flame is one candidate, treating a natural process of change as a catastrophe to be prevented, and burning his own selfhood to stop it. But other interpretations exist. Was the first sin the betrayal by Seath? The creation of the undead curse? The shattering of the dark soul across all of humanity? All of these could qualify, depending on your theological framework. Aldia speaks about it as if you should know what it is without being told. The game named itself after it without defining it. Mystery 117. Where is Velka in Dark Souls 3? Absolution, the removal of sin, can still be obtained in the third game through a statue of Velka. But Velka herself, her covenant, her associated characters are entirely absent. The statue is there, but the goddess seemingly is not. Given how systematically the third game removes and diminishes the divine infrastructure of the prior ages, this makes a kind of sense. But Velka was one of the more unusual and interesting figures in the lore, a keeper of records, an administrator of cosmic justice, and her disappearance is not addressed. Mystery 118. What does Havel actually know that made him Seath's enemy? Havel the Rock and Seath the Scaleless were bitter enemies during the Age of Gwyn. Havel deeply despised magic and developed means to counter Seath's abilities. His armor, his shield, his ring are all oriented against magical damage. This kind of targeted antagonism usually comes from experience. Did Havel encounter Seath directly? Was there an incident between them that created this enmity? And why is Havel imprisoned in a tower below the undead Berg in the game's present? Who put him there, and why? Mystery 119. What is the relationship between the Pale Shade of Londor and the greater machinery of Uria's plan? The Pale Shade appears as both an invader, when you upset Uria, and a summonable phantom, when you don't. The Shade is Londor's watcher, a guardian sent to ensure the Lord of Hollow's plan stays on track. But the Shade's actual identity, whether they were a person once, whether they have any autonomy, whether they are fully aware of their role, is not explored. Mystery 120. What are the Abyss Watchers watching for, and when did they begin? The Abyss Watchers in Dark Souls 3 are warriors who hunt the Dark Sign and the corruption it carries, inspired by Artorias himself. They sought a way to end the spread of the Abyss. They trained together, shared the same blood, and in doing so, linked their souls so thoroughly that when one turned, they all fell into conflict with each other. A legion that destroyed itself fighting its own members. But the specific trigger for their corruption, what caused the first one to turn, is not identified. Mystery 121. What actually happened to Andre in the time between games? He is in Dark Souls 1. He is in Dark Souls 3, apparently the same being. He hammers and advises and does not hollow. He seems perfectly content. Is he one of the beings that has found a way around the undead curse? Is he protected by something? His forge, his craft, the specific divine lineage of his vocation? Or is the simplest reading correct, that he is just a being whose connection to his work is so complete that it anchors him across ages in a way that nothing else has managed? Mystery 122. What is the profaned capital, and what was its capital of? In Dark Souls 3, the profaned capital is a ruined city deep underground, associated with the profaned flame, a fire that burns eternally in violation of the natural order, a fire that cannot be linked or used for any purpose beyond burning. Something happened there. The flame appeared, consumed its civilization, and left behind a maze of broken architecture and creatures twisted by its heat. What was the city before the profanation? Who lived there? What did they do to earn a fire that would not stop? Mystery 123. What is the pus of man? Dark tendrils that burst from the bodies of certain creatures in Dark Souls 3, particularly infected hollows. They look like the abyss made physical, dark matter erupting from within. They are apparently an advanced stage of abyss corruption, a more literal transformation than standard hollowing. But their origin, the specific mechanism of their appearance, and whether they retain any consciousness of the person they were before the corruption, these are not addressed. Mystery 124. What are the Corvian creatures and where did they come from? Corvians appear in the Ashes of Ariandel DLC, humanoid crow people who inhabit the painted world and seem to understand it very well. They came from outside the painting at some point. They know the painting must burn, and they want it to happen. They are aligned with the painter and the new world's potential rather than Frida and Stasis. But their origin, their relationship to the crows that guard Firelink Shrine, to Velka's symbolism, to the crows that carry you at the beginning of the first game, is not explained. Mystery 125. Why do the two primordial serpents have such different relationships to communication? Frampt emerges near Firelink Shrine and speaks to anyone who approaches, openly, easily, with apparent willingness to engage. Kathi only appears if you have made specific choices that signal your openness to his agenda, and then speaks in places of dark significance. This difference in approach might simply be a stylistic choice by the developers, but lorically it implies very different strategies. Frampt is the open diplomat. Kathi is the hidden advisor. Did they decide their respective approaches, or was that always their nature? Now the night is deep around you. The mysteries have been flowing through you for some time, and perhaps some of them have already dissolved into dreams that are forming at the edges of your thoughts. Let them form. Let Artorias walk through them, limping but still fighting. Let Gwendolyn maintain his illusions in a dark room that no one visits anymore. Let Gale stand in the ash and reach for something he cannot quite hold. Let the fire that has been burning throughout this entire story burn low and warm and eventually rest. Mystery 126 through 150. These last mysteries are the ones that do not fit neatly into any category. They live in the corners of the lore, in details so small that they are easy to miss, in implications so large that they resist being examined directly. Think of them as the embers of what we have covered tonight. Still glowing, still warm, not quite finished yet. But before we settle into the final quiet 25, let us take a moment to sit with the weight of what we have covered, because there is something remarkable about a piece of art that generates this many questions while still feeling completely whole. The Dark Souls franchise is not broken or incomplete in its storytelling. It is deliberately, lovingly inexhaustible. The questions it raises are not oversights or gaps in the design. They are the design. Every mystery is a space intentionally left open, a room with no ceiling, an invitation to look up and wonder. Other games tell you their stories. Dark Souls whispers fragments of one at you and trusts you to assemble the rest from silence and shadow, and the shapes that absence leaves behind when something important has been removed. The empty alcove in Anor Londo, the discarded undead in the courtyard who says nothing, the painting that hangs in the first painted world with a figure so faded you cannot identify them. Every absent thing points at something real. That is the tradition you have been participating in tonight by simply listening. by holding these questions with the attention they deserve, by not demanding that they be answered, and finding that the not answering is itself a kind of answer. The Dark Souls franchise, as of this writing, has not received a direct continuation beyond the third game and its DLC. The stories of Lordran, Drangleic, and Lothric have reached their endings, all of them ambiguous, all of them unresolved in the way that genuinely open-ended stories are unresolved, not with cliffhangers waiting for sequels, but with the specific resonance of questions that have been asked as honestly as possible without the expectation of closure. And maybe that is right. Maybe the last mystery of Dark Souls, the one underneath all these 150, is the mystery of why it moves us the way it does. Why sitting in a dark room with a controller, dying repeatedly in a world that offers no mercy and very little explanation, produces something that feels like genuine grief and wonder and recognition. Perhaps it is because the world of Dark Souls, for all its dragons and gods and cosmic horrors, is fundamentally a meditation on very human experiences. The experience of working towards something you might not achieve. The experience of helping someone who cannot be saved. The experience of finding something beautiful in a ruin. The experience of carrying the marks of failure and continuing anyway, not because you are certain of success, but because you do not know what else to do with the time you have. The cycle turns. The flame fades. New champions come. Most of them fail. A very few do not. That is, at its core, a story about being alive. And now, one final breath, one final slowing of the pace, and we settle into the last of our mysteries. Mystery 126. Why does the giant blacksmith in Anor Londo seem sad? He is one of the largest NPCs in the game, hammering quietly in his room in the Upper Cathedral District. He speaks simply, in the monosyllabic way of his kind, and his function is practical. He upgrades divine weapons. But there is a quality to his presence that sits outside pure function. He is alone in a divine city that has been abandoned by the gods he was presumably made to serve. He stayed while they left. Is the sadness in him the sadness of loyalty outlasting its context? Or is he simply too old and too large and too committed to his craft to notice that the reason for the craft has gone away? Mystery 127. What is the dingy set's owner hiding from? And why does she go hollow so close to Firelink's shrine? The dingy set, a worn and simple garment with a cap tilted to conceal the face, is found early in the game near the entrance to the undead Burg. The woman who owned it, unnamed, hollowed. She never made it far. Why was she hiding her identity, and why did she hollow so quickly? Was she someone being hunted? A prior firekeeper who chose not to serve? Someone who arrived in Lordran with a specific purpose and found it could not be achieved? Mystery 128. What does Patches actually believe about the gods, and is it sincere? Patches. The hyena appears in multiple From Software games, always as a greedy, roguish figure who will try to push you into a pit and then apologize very sincerely while offering to sell you things. He professes profound skepticism about clerics and the gods they serve. He is consistently irreverent about the divine. But is this a genuine philosophical position, or simply a persona that a very clever criminal has constructed to explain why he takes other people's things? Is there genuine thought underneath Patches' cynicism? Or is the cynicism itself the hustle? Mystery 129. What happened to the Sunlight Altar between the first and third games? In the first game, the Sunlight Altar in the Undead Parish is the heart of the Warriors of Sunlight Covenant. It is attended. People pray there. Solaire himself is part of the Covenant. By the third game, the altars to the Firstborn still exist. Prism stones and sunlight metals still accumulate. But the Covenant has transformed. What happened in the intervening ages to change the relationship between Gwyn's Firstborn's followers and the world they inhabit? Mystery 130. Why does the music in Firelink's shrine change when you kill the Firekeeper? It becomes quiet. The ambient music that characterized the hub of the world goes silent. The space that was already melancholy becomes something drier and emptier. Mechanically, this is a consequence. The Firekeeper is dead. The bonfire is diminished. The warmth is lessened. But musically, it is a choice that communicates grief more powerfully than any NPC reaction could. Who decided that silence was the appropriate eulogy? And what does the silence mean for the world? Not just the player, Do the spirits of dead undead who rely on Firelink as an anchor feel the difference? Mystery 131. What were the moonlight butterflies before Seath made them what they are? Seath created the moonlight butterfly, a beautiful, enormous insect that flies through the dark-root garden trailing light. Its soul is described as a creation of his. But butterflies do not emerge from nothing. Did Seath begin with an existing creature and transform it, the way he transformed his kidnapping victims into pisakas? Or did he build something from other raw materials, shards of moonlight, fragments of crystal, living filaments of his own magic, into something that had no organic predecessor? What was its purpose in his design, this luminous creature that does not experiment or collect, just flies? Mystery 132. What is the undead curse to an undead who cannot remember being alive? Most undead in the games remember something of their prior lives, their names, their vocations, their families. The process of hollowing erodes this, but recently cursed undead are still themselves. The question is what the curse feels like to someone who has been undead so long that the memories of being mortal have simply faded. Not hollowed, just old. Does the curse feel different when there is no before to compare it to? Do very old undead, like Andre or certain NPCs who have clearly been around for ages, experience the dark sign differently than new arrivals? Is there a version of undeath that eventually becomes simply the way things are? Mystery 133. Why do some undead accept their condition and thrive while others hollow immediately? The capacity to resist hollowing seems tied to purpose, having something you care about, something that makes the cycling through death and fire worth continuing. Solaire has his sun, Andre has his forge, Siegmeyer has his adventure. The ones who hollow fastest are often the ones who arrived without a clear reason for being there, driven only by the compulsion of the curse rather than a personal mission. Is the defense against hollowing genuinely psychological? Does caring about something protect you in a way that goes beyond philosophy and operates at the level of the soul itself? Mystery 134. What did the gods do with their time in Anor Londo before the Age of Fire began to fade? They ruled. They were worshipped. They cultivated power and political relationships and presumably something that resembled domestic life. We see the evidence of elaborate feasts in certain cathedral areas. We see the remnants of a court with its own politics. But the texture of divine daily life, what it felt like from the inside to be a god in the Age of Gods, is invisible to us. Did they love each other? Did they argue? Were there smaller gods, lesser figures in the divine hierarchy who had ordinary grievances and petty concerns alongside the enormous ones? Did divinity grant peace as well as power? Mystery 135. What would a divine child of Guinevere and the flame god Flan look like? Guinevere is the princess of sunlight, carrier of warmth and generosity, an enormous and radiant presence even in her illusory form. The flame god Flan, mentioned only in item descriptions, is presumably a being of fire. Their union, which produced actual children, would carry extraordinary inheritance. Those children would carry sunlight and divine flame both, potentially being among the most powerful beings in a post-Lordran world. Where are they? What did they become? Are any of the strange powerful beings encountered in later ages descended from this lineage without knowing it? Mystery 136. Why does Sif fight you at all, if Sif can recognize the chosen undead? In the base game, Sif guards Artorias' grave and fights you when you enter. If you have completed the DLC beforehand, Sif recognizes you, but still fights, even while limping, even visibly reluctant. The recognition does not stop the battle. The wolf sees the person who actually finished Artorias' work and still cannot step aside. Is this because the grave's protection is so deeply embedded in Sif's purpose that it overrides personal recognition? Is it because Sif understands that the items in the grave need to be taken by someone worthy, and this is the test? Or is it simpler and sadder than that? That Sif has been guarding this place for so long that the guarding itself is all that remains of who Sif is? Mystery 137. What is the smell of the abyss? This is not a question the game poses, or that any lore scholar can answer from item descriptions. It is a question about experience, about phenomenology, about what it would actually be like to walk into the darkness that consumed Oolacile. The visual representation is dark tendrils and wrongness. But smell is the most emotionally direct of the senses, the one most tightly bound to memory and feeling. Does the abyss smell like old stone, like absence, like something that was once warmth turned inside out? The hollows who have been there longer than anyone say nothing about it. They cannot. Mystery 138. Why is the symbol of the dark moon also the symbol of Gwyn's firstborn's covenant? The sunlight metal, the currency of the warriors of sunlight, carries a symbol that is also associated with the dark moon blades. Two covenants, apparently serving different masters, the firstborn's inherited lightning versus Gwendolyn's moon magic, sharing iconography. Is this because both trace back to the same divine lineage, different expressions of the same original power? Or did one covenant deliberately adopt the other's symbol, claiming a connection that may not be metaphysically accurate? Mystery 139. What is the relationship between the furtive pygmy's silence in the opening and the voice that narrates it? The opening cinematic gives us the history of the world from a perspective that knows everything. It knows about the pygmy. It knows about the dark soul. It speaks of these events as completed history. But the pygmy is described as furtive, small, quiet, hidden. A being defined by silence and concealment would not narrate their own story with authority. So, who is narrating? Who has enough perspective to describe the pygmy objectively, to know about the finding of the dark soul, to understand the significance of what the first human found in the earth before the Age of Fire truly began? Mystery 140. What did the prisoners in the undead asylum think about as they waited? The undead asylum is a prison built to contain the marked, those who bear the dark sign, sent there by a society that did not know what else to do with them. The prisoners in their cells are hollows or near hollows by the time the game begins, most of them gone. But before they hollowed, they were people. They had been taken from their homes, their families, their lives, and put here at the edge of the world because they had done something they did not choose to do, caught a disease they did not seek. What did they think about? Did they tell each other stories? Did they maintain connections with other prisoners through the walls? Did they hear the bells when they rang from down in their cells and wonder what the sound meant? Mystery 141. What do the channelers experience as they move through the world, collecting specimens for Seath? The six-eyed helmets compensate for Seath's blindness. The channelers are his eyes, moving through distant territories, seeing through their arrangement of lenses and reporting back. But what is that experience like from inside? To serve as the visual apparatus of another being while maintaining your own consciousness? To wander Lordran not in service of your own purposes, but as an extension of a mad dragon's seeing? Do they know what they are contributing to? Do they care? Mystery 142. Why does the Age of Fire need human sacrifice specifically to sustain it? The linking of the flame requires the sacrifice of beings with powerful souls. Gwyn himself burned. Subsequent links were made by Lords of Cinder, beings who gave their selfhood to the fire. But why humans, or human-adjacent beings? Why does the fire require the specific kind of fuel that a person represents? There are other powerful souls in Lordran. The soul of a crystal lizard, the soul of a dragon. Why is human sacrifice specifically the mechanism, and not some other form of energy? Mystery 143. What happens to a soul in the space between one bonfire and the next? When you die and your soul residue is left behind at the point of death, there is a moment where the physical body falls and the soul stuff separates and begins to make its way back to the bonfire. What is that journey like from the inside? Is it instantaneous, or is there a traverse? A dark passage between the point of death and the point of resurrection? Do the souls of other undead who have died similarly drift through the same non-space? Is there a moment where all the lost souls of Lordran occupy the same intermediate territory, briefly and wordlessly present to each other before each snaps back to its respective bonfire? Mystery 144. What is the true nature of time in the Dark Souls universe? Is the undead curse creating loops, or is time simply moving in one direction very slowly? Dark Souls 2 made the strongest case for cyclical time. Kingdoms rise and fall in patterns that rhyme with each other, and the cycle of fire and dark explicitly repeats. But the games also seem to move forward chronologically. The third game's world is further along, more degraded, more final than the first. So, is it a loop or is it a spiral? Moving in circles, but also moving forward, reaching a destination one orbit at a time? And if so, where does the spiral ultimately lead? Mystery 145. What would Gwyn say if whatever remains of him in the kiln could still form words? He is hollow. He has been hollow for an age, burning and maintaining a flame that was already dying when he first walked into it. There is no coherence left. But the question invites imagination. What would the Lord of Sunlight say if the flame gave him back one moment of clarity? Would he defend what he built? Would he ask forgiveness? Would he ask about his children? Would he ask about the dragons he destroyed and whether what he did to them was just? Or would he say nothing at all, because words are a human way of resolving things, and Gwyn has been past words for so long that he has forgotten they existed? Mystery 146. Is there beauty in the Age of Dark? The Age of Dark is always framed as the ending, as the loss, as the cold and empty alternative to the warmth of fire. But the game's most beautiful moments are often its darkest. The kiln of the first flame at the end. Ash and silence. Ash Lake, gray and ancient and enormous. New Londo ruins, flooded in blue, the ghosts of things that were. The places where fire is absent or diminished have their own kind of grandeur. If the Age of Dark came fully, if the flame went out and the world entered whatever comes next, would that world be without beauty, or would it simply be a beauty that fire had never learned to illuminate? Mystery 147. What does Nito feel, wrapped in his shroud of corpses at the bottom of the world? Nito is the first of the dead. He controls death. His body is literally composed of the skeletons of fallen beings, wrapped in a darkness that seems generated by his presence rather than simply surrounding it. He is ancient beyond any other figure in the game's present, and he has been down here, in the tomb of the giants, in the darkness, for longer than living memory reaches. What is his inner life? Does he grieve? Does he feel kinship with the dead he carries? Or are they simply material, the way a tree is made of cells that are not experiencing the tree's existence? Does the first of the dead ever wish to be alive? Mystery 148. Who lit the first bonfire in Lordran? Not the first bonfire of the current cycle. The actual first bonfire. The first time someone understood that they could use a fragment of the first flame's power to create an anchor in the world, to mark a spot as safe and significant and returnable. Who was it? Were they undead? Or someone who understood the flame's properties before the undead curse spread widely enough for the dark sign to be common? Did they know what they were inventing? Did the discovery spread from a single originating point? Or did multiple beings independently discover the same principle in different locations at roughly the same time? Mystery 149. What does it feel like to link the flame? Gwyn did it. Knights of Cinder did it. Lords of Cinder did it in Dark Souls 3. And the game is fundamentally about convincing them to do it again. But no one who has done it has been able to describe it because the process consumes them. The linking is a sacrifice of identity, not just body. It is the most significant act in the franchise, and it is also the most unknowable from the outside. Is it painful? Is it ecstatic? Is there a moment where the person who walks into the flame understands something they never could have understood before, and then loses the capacity to carry that understanding forward? Is the sacrifice the point, or is the sacrifice the cost of a point that is worth making? Mystery 150. What comes after the Age of Dark? No one knows the answer to that last one. Not Aldea, who searched for a path outside the cycle and found only a burning transformation. Not Kathi, who has been working toward it for so long that whatever he originally wanted from it has probably been reshaped by the wanting. Not Frampt, who serves a flame that is dying. Not the Firekeeper, who can see the darkness clearly and chooses to hold a torch against it anyway. Not the Painter Girl, brushing her new world onto canvas in a language of dark pigment and careful light. Nobody knows what comes after, but that is all right. That is, in fact, the point. The Dark Souls series is not a mystery to be solved. It is a space to inhabit, to wander, to sit with the questions and not demand that they resolve. The fire fades, new ones are lit, stories end and other stories begin in the smoke. And somewhere in the middle of all that, somewhere in the ash and the gold and the dark between bonfires, there is something that feels like meaning, even if you cannot quite name it. You have traveled a long way tonight. You have sat with 150 questions that reach from the beginning of a world to the edge of its end. from the very first ignition of a flame that no one understands to the last breath of a slave knight who gave everything he had so that a painter girl could make something new. You have held the names of gods, and the names of knights, and the names of wolves, and dragons, and hollows, and serpents that lie, and serpents that also lie. And none of it resolved, none of it closed. Every question opened onto another question, and the darkness at the center of each one was not the hostile dark of the abyss, but the generous dark of genuine mystery, the kind that exists not because something was forgotten or withheld, but because some things are simply too large to be completed. There is something worth saying here, as the night deepens and the questions settle, about what it means to inhabit a world built on this kind of deliberate incompleteness. Most stories are designed to satisfy. They build tension toward resolution. They make promises and then keep them. The pleasure of the conventional story is the pleasure of a door opening, of light falling into a room that was dark. Dark Souls does something different. It makes you comfortable with the door staying closed. It trains you gradually to find the closed door interesting rather than frustrating, to read what is in the grain of the wood, to notice the sounds from the other side without demanding the handle turn. This is not a small thing. It is, in fact, a kind of education that reaches beyond the game, a practice of sitting with uncertainty and finding it generative rather than paralyzing. The lore scholars who have spent a decade with these games, who have built entire analysis frameworks and video series and written thousands of words about the meaning of a single item description, they are practicing something valuable. The art of close reading, the art of asking why, the art of holding a question long enough that it shows you more of itself than it would under the pressure of needing an answer immediately. These are skills, and they are skills that the world, your world, the one you will wake up in tomorrow morning, also rewards. Every complicated thing in your life has its unsolved mysteries. Every person you love is, at some level, unexplained. Every grief carries questions you cannot fully close. Every joy has origins you cannot entirely trace. Dark Souls teaches you to walk into all of that and keep moving, to die and come back, to try again with what you have learned from the failure, even when what you learned is incomplete, even when the map is still mostly blank. The fire fades, new ones are lit, stories end and other stories begin in the smoke. And somewhere in the middle of all that, somewhere in the ash and the gold and the dark between bonfires, there is something that feels like meaning, even if you cannot quite name it. The answer is not link the fire. It is not end the fire. It is not even become the fire. The answer might just be this: the act of asking, the act of caring enough about the questions to spend a whole night in Lordran, in the dark, with a voice speaking slowly about things that will never fully resolve, feeling the weight of them, letting them settle somewhere deep. That attention, that sustained, patient, wondering attention to a world that repays it endlessly. That is what it means to praise the sun. Not worship of a literal light, but the willingness to look up towards something warm and distant and ask what it is, even knowing you may never get a clean answer. The fire burns a little lower now. The night is at its deepest point, the hour before the sky begins to make its slow concession toward dawn. Let those thoughts rest now. Let the names dissolve. Gwyn, Artorias, Gwyndolin, Seath, Manus, Aldea, Gael. Let the great halls of Anor Londo go dark in your mind the way they go dark when you kill an illusion. Let the undead settle at their bonfires. Let the fire burn low and warm. And let yourself drift into the dark. Not the abyss dark, not the hollow dark, the other kind of dark, the quiet kind. The kind that exists between one cycle and the next, before anything has been decided, before anything has been demanded. Sleep well. May whatever fires you carry burn steadily through the night, and may you wake, as the doll once said, to find your worth in the waking world.